One morning in September 2019, police arrived at a quiet home in Pennsylvania to check on someone who had not been responding to calls. From the outside, everything seemed normal. Both the windows were closed and the curtains were drawn, but no one answered the door. When the officers entered the house, they were unsettled by what they found: blood on the floors, towels soaked with stains, and obvious signs of violence. As they moved upstairs, they were confronted with a scene much worse than they had anticipated. Margaret Sumney was born on June 28, 1952, in Pittsburgh. She grew up in her family's dance studio, a lively center of creativity that was beloved by the community. The studio was more than just a place of work, it was like a second home to her. Eventually, Margaret became a ballet instructor, helping to manage the studio and organizing beloved Christmas performances that turned into a local tradition. Her warmth and enthusiasm left a significant impact on everyone she encountered. With a magnetic personality, she always appeared polished, composed. Despite life's challenges, Margaret remained resilient and purposeful. In her early adulthood, Margaret married. Unfortunately, their relationship quickly fell apart due to his emotional unavailability and irresponsibility. After their divorce, Margaret became a single mother to 2 daughters. With no help from their father, she took on all the responsibilities of parenting while also working at the studio. Despite these challenges, she provided a loving and structured home for her daughters. Years later, Margaret met another man, a charming dentist and Harvard graduate. His charisma and apparent commitment gave Margaret the stability she had been seeking. They married in 1986, created a life filled with financial security and comfort in a well-furnished home in Pennsylvania. In 1989, they welcomed a son, David Sumney. Her husband actively participated in raising David, and he also developed a strong bond with Margaret's daughters. Although their blended family seemed to thrive on the outside, the reality inside the home was different. David was raised without boundaries. From a young age, all his wishes were immediately fulfilled, whether it was toys, vacations, or treats. As he grew older, he started demanding them, learning how to manipulate others to get what he wanted. Even simple tasks became negotiable, and he refused to do them without a reward. He had no understanding of gratitude or responsibility. His only concern was his own benefit. One particularly alarming incident occurred when he found a bird in the backyard and squeezed it to death. Margaret was horrified by his complete lack of remorse, nervously joked with family members about him potentially becoming a criminal. However, her humor masked her genuine concern. David showed no empathy or guilt. Without intervention, these troubling traits only became more pronounced as he grew older. By 2001, Margaret's marriage had quietly ended in divorce, which, while amicable, brought an end to the stability Margaret had worked so hard to achieve. Financially, the family fell apart. Her husband stopped providing support, and the dance studio that had once been central to their lives was no longer viable, forcing Margaret to close it down. With limited resources, she took a job at a clothing store to meet basic needs, a humble but necessary step. Meanwhile, David's sense of entitlement grew. Despite the family's financial struggles, he continued to expect special treatment and exhibited unchanged behavior. Even while dealing with his own financial issues, his father financially supported him at a significant personal cost, justifying it as a way to maintain their fragile bond and often giving in to his son's demands. Although Margaret and her husband no longer lived together, they remained emotionally connected, trapped in a cycle of responding to David's volatile moods. He moved easily between both homes, exploiting their desire for harmony and love. Over the years, David's influence over his parents intensified. Despite their declining finances, increasing instability, neither parent adjusted their approach. The family dynamic had shifted completely, with their lives revolving around managing their son's feelings and minimizing his outbursts. In 2008, at 19 years old, David began studying mathematics at George Washington University. His parents, who had faced many hardships, were hopeful that higher education and a structured setting would improve his behavior. Despite the high costs of housing, tuition, and living expenses, his parents supported him financially. In 2010, Margaret visited Washington, D.C. to see her son. During this visit, she called her daughter, Ellen, from a hospital, claiming that David had attempted to harm himself with a knife and that she had injured her head in the process. However, Margaret's account was inconsistent. She was evasive, defensive about the details. When Ellen arrived, she found her mother and brother in different hospital rooms, which was unusual and unexplained. The medical staff were not forthcoming with information. Ellen started to worry that David's violent behavior had escalated, possibly directed at their mother. Despite her concerns, no investigation was initiated, and the incident went unexamined. Soon after, David was expelled from the university due to ongoing absenteeism and repeated rule violations. This news devastated his parents, as all their emotional, financial, and psychological efforts had ended in another failure. David returned to Pennsylvania, shuttling between his parents' homes without showing any signs of improvement. In July 2015, 26-year-old David hit a new low in his life. He was unemployed, lacked motivation, and depended entirely on his parents. When he asked his father for a substantial amount of money for a vacation and was turned down, things escalated violently. David physically assaulted his father, viciously beating him in their home. Neighbors, disturbed by the noise, called the police. Upon arrival, the officers found David on top of his father, hitting him. His father suffered severe injuries, including brain hemorrhaging, spinal damage, and significant internal injuries. As a result, he was left unable to walk or care for himself and had to be moved to a long-term nursing facility. David was arrested at the scene and charged with aggravated assault. He was released shortly after posting bail. The father he nearly killed could no longer communicate for himself. Despite the violent attack, David faced minimal consequences. With little legal opposition and a family too shattered to resist, he walked away free, unchanged, unrepentant, more emboldened than ever. Afterward, he began telling people that he had joined the U.S. Navy. Although this story seemed odd, Margaret held on to it. For her, the idea of military service represented hope, a structured, disciplined path that could save her son from his troubled state. However, there was no evidence of any enlistment. He didn't provide any documents, wear a uniform, or answer questions about his claimed service. Every time someone asked, his responses were vague and unverifiable. At the same time, David was undergoing a physical transformation. He became obsessed with strength training, quickly gaining a lot of muscle. Now nearly 6.5 feet tall and heavily built, he appeared as intimidating as his behavior had become. As his physical strength increased, his aggression followed suit. David grew more unpredictable, volatile. Conversations with him were filled with hostility, subtle threats, and direct attempts to control those around him. He made it clear that any pushback would be met with force. Margaret, exhausted from years of fear, confusion, and love. She stayed by his side, still hoping for the return of the son she once knew. But by then, control was lost for her and the rest of the family. David was no longer just difficult or spoiled, he had become dangerous. No one seemed able or willing to stop him. In November 2016, another terrifying incident occurred at Margaret's home. Late one night, David, who was very drunk, entered her bedroom and began to strangle her while she slept. The attack was sudden and violent. Due to his large size and strength, Margaret struggled to fight back. However, she managed to break free and scream for help. David left the room without saying anything, returned to his own. Margaret then called the police. When they arrived, they found David asleep, smelling strongly of alcohol. Margaret had visible bruises, finger marks on her neck and ribs. She recounted the attack to the officers, mentioning that David had referred to a Navy SEAL reference. David was arrested, and the situation was classified as domestic violence with aggravating factors. However, Margaret intervened again. Concerned that a felony charge would jeopardize her son's future, she urged the prosecutors to lessen the charges. She argued that he was under the influence and needed rehabilitation instead of imprisonment. She also pushed the idea, though unverified, that David had served in the U.S. Navy, presenting it as a sign of his potential. Her plea was convincing enough for the court to reduce the felony charge to a lesser offense, allowing David to avoid severe punishment. During court proceedings, an official background check revealed a shocking truth: David had never served in any branch of the military. The story he had told for years was entirely false. There was no record of him being recruited, enlisted, or trained. His military persona was a deliberate lie, used to hide his failures and violent tendencies. Despite this, Margaret still believed her son could change. David received a 16-month sentence, marking his first genuine consequence. While in prison, he portrayed himself as someone struggling with addiction, rather than his aggressive behavior. He claimed that alcohol was the source of his problems, not a lack of empathy or violent impulses. This approach worked for him. A social worker supported his transfer to a rehabilitation facility instead of prison, and the court granted it. At the Pennsylvania Recovery Center, David was put under structured supervision. He participated in therapy sessions and group activities. Margaret visited regularly, bringing supplies and defending her son. She saw the rehabilitation as a potential turning point. She hoped that if he completed the program, the worst would be behind him. After finishing treatment, David moved into transitional housing, quickly got a job. Progress reports indicated that he followed the rules and showed signs of adjustment. To his hopeful family, he appeared reformed. However, this appearance was only skin deep. Beneath the good behavior was the same manipulative person. David never truly accepted responsibility for his past, never showed genuine remorse, and never acknowledged the pain he caused. By 2018, David Summey's carefully crafted image was beginning to fall apart, though not fast enough for anyone to notice. In August, his father passed away at the age of 74 in a Pennsylvania nursing home. The official cause of death was listed as age-related health issues. However, those who knew the family understood that the real reason stemmed from a severe beating he suffered in 2015 at the hands of his son. This violent act resulted in the loss of his independence, ability to work, and dignity. His health steadily declined, could not be reversed. While the family never discussed it openly, there was a shared understanding that David's attack had dramatically altered his father's identity. Throughout this time, David faced no new charges and felt no remorse. At the funeral, Margaret remained composed and did not speak out against her son, which created tension among family members. They were baffled as to why she would continue to protect someone who had caused such pain. For them, it was not just a personal tragedy, but also a systemic failure. They believed law enforcement acted too late, the courts were too lenient, and Margaret's instinct to protect may have allowed a dangerous individual to continue endangering others. In 2019, David started a new relationship using a dating app. The woman moved in with him shortly after they met. At first, he seemed to have changed for the better. He was charming, respectful, and attentive. However, this behavior didn't last long. He soon became controlling and aggressive, closely monitoring her actions, imposing strict rules in their home. She noticed something troubling. David was writing checks in the name of his mother, Margaret. He claimed that Margaret had mental health issues and that he was handling her finances, even going so far as to forge her signature when necessary. However, there was no legal documentation, such as a power of attorney or a court order, to back up his claims. When his girlfriend voiced her concerns, he dismissed them, saying there were delays with the paperwork. Although she suspected he was committing fraud, she did not have enough evidence to report him to the authorities. As their relationship deteriorated and she prepared to leave, David reacted with anger. Fearing rejection, he insisted she meet him at a hotel in Atlantic City. Once there, he became abusive. Over several days, he physically attacked her, strangled her until she lost consciousness, and kept her captive without any means to get help. At one point, believing he had killed her, he abandoned the room. She lay injured and unresponsive until a concerned housekeeper, troubled by the prolonged "do not disturb" sign, entered the room. The housekeeper discovered that she was alive, but in critical condition. She was taken to the hospital, and the police began an investigation. On July 16, 2019, an arrest warrant for David was issued, but due to a crucial mistake, the warrant wasn't entered into the federal database. This oversight allowed David to return to Pennsylvania without being identified as a fugitive. Days later, he was arrested on unrelated charges but was released because the warrant was not in the system. The protective measures designed to help the woman. The failure to communicate between agencies led to tragic outcomes. On September 1, 2019, one of Margaret's sisters tried to contact her several times, but her calls went unanswered. Worried, she contacted Margaret's eldest daughter, Ellen, who was also unable to reach her mother. By the morning of September 2nd, Ellen's anxiety grew as she continued trying to contact Margaret. Eventually, David answered the phone and stated that Margaret was asleep, refusing to let her speak to anyone. His tone was emotionless, which worried her. Ellen decided to contact local authorities to request a welfare check. When the police arrived at Margaret's home, everything seemed quiet. The windows were shut, and no one answered the door. After a few minutes, the officers forced their way inside and immediately sensed that something was amiss. A foul odor filled the air, blood stains were visible in several rooms, and there were drag marks suggesting an attempt to clean up or conceal something. Upstairs, they found Margaret in the bathtub. She had been dead for over 24 hours. She suffered broken ribs, a broken spine, cuts to her face and bruising all over her body. An autopsy report concluded that Margaret Summey died from blunt force trauma and her death was declared a homicide. Blood was on the walls and floors. In the hallway, investigators discovered a sickle with what appeared to be blood on it. The revolver that belonged to Margaret was missing, leaving only its empty ammunition box behind. Forensic experts carefully analyzed the scene. The amount of blood, attempts to clean up, and the arrangement of items suggested that this was not just a violent incident, but also a well-planned one. This was not an impulsive act, it was intentional and methodical. When questioned by police, David Summey denied any involvement in his mother's death. Instead, he said it was likely an accident or a drug overdose. When detectives described Ms. Summey's injuries, David Summey suggested that his mother had been dating a man and that he should be investigated. However, when police downloaded the contents of Summey's cell phone, they found hundreds of pictures of his mother being beaten to death. Assistant District Attorney Michael Pradines said the first photo was taken at 4:50 a.m. on August 30th. Interspersed among many of the victims' photos are selfies of the defendant, in which the defendant is seen with his face covered in blood, and in one photo he is seen giving a thumbs up, the prosecutor said. Pradines said investigators also found a video on his phone recorded at 2:41 a.m. on September 1, 2019, of David Summey washing his mother's body in the bathtub. In addition to the photos, his browsing history provided incriminating information. He had searched for ways to clean blood from surfaces, how human bodies decompose, and strategies to avoid detection in homes. David conducted searches on his phone at 11:11 a.m. on August 30th, 2019, including the phrase, "How long does it take before a body starts to decompose?" He had also looked up chemical odor neutralizers and information on mummification. Rather than panicking, David had planned ahead. The brutality of the crime and the calculated nature of his actions painted a psychological picture of someone without a conscience, remorse, or restraint. Investigators were certain of his guilt, but their challenge was to apprehend him. Police reached out to Ellen, the only person still occasionally in touch with David, asked for her assistance in setting a trap. She agreed. When he showed up, officers arrested him immediately. They found Margaret's checks and pieces of her jewelry among his belongings. He was formally charged with third-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, theft, and related offenses. A psychiatric evaluation determined that he was fit to stand trial. November 17, 2022, David pleaded guilty to third-degree murder, admitted his guilt, and received a sentence of 20 to 40 years in prison. With time already served, he would be eligible for parole in 2039, around his 50th birthday. David also faces another criminal case in Atlantic City, where his ex-girlfriend said he waterboarded and strangled her in a hotel room in July 2019. For Margaret's surviving relatives, this outcome felt like a betrayal. Given the horror of the crime, the photographic evidence, the forensic findings, and the digital trace, they believed he should have faced harsher charges. Margaret's daughters and sisters publicly criticized the deal and called the sentence insufficient. Ellen said, "For someone who seems to enjoy killing people, with a history of violence, he should never be out in society again." In court, David made a short statement where he expressed regret and claimed he couldn't comprehend how he committed his actions. However, his apology felt insincere. For Margaret Summey's family, this was not a moment of madness. It was the tragic culmination of a lifetime filled with manipulation, abuse, and ignored warning signs. Margaret's life ended not abruptly, but following a prolonged and preventable decline. She was not killed by a stranger, but by the very child she had always stood up for. Ellen has cut all ties with her brother, who is now a convicted murderer and no longer resembles the family member she once knew. What remains is not only profound grief, but also the heavy burden of realizing that this tragedy could have been avoided. The tragic murder of Margaret Sumney is a harrowing reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked violence and systemic failures. Margaret, a loving mother, ballet teacher, and pillar of her Pennsylvania community, endured years of increasingly violent assault, manipulation, and abuse at the hands of her son, culminating in her brutal death. Despite numerous warning signs, from David's lack of empathy as a child to his violent attacks on his father and mother, the continued leniency of the legal system and Margaret's unwavering hope for redemption allowed his dangerous behavior to continue. The gruesome evidence, including photographs and videos David took during the crime, revealed a calculated and remorseless act, but his plea agreement to third-degree murder and his 20 to 40-year sentence left Margaret's family feeling betrayed by a justice system that failed to deliver proportionate consequences. This case highlights the urgent need for early intervention in cases of domestic violence, stricter enforcement of legal accountability, and increased awareness of manipulative behaviors that can escalate into tragedy. Margaret's legacy, defined by her warmth and resilience, lives on in the memories of those she touched, but her story is a wake-up call to prevent such preventable losses in the future.
In 1995, 11-year-old Lacey Phillips lived with her mother, Mary, her father, James, and her older siblings. Brother Jesse, who was 15 at the time, and sister Darla, who was 17. The family was very close-knit and had a strong bond. The Phillips family lived in their own home in a small town called Bald Knob, Arkansas, which they had moved to 5 years earlier from Hope, Arkansas. They considered Bald Knob an ideal place for family life and raising children. Mary was known as a loving mother and wife, fond of gardening, outdoor recreation. The Phillips family was a typical American family, slowly building their happiness, unaware of how cruelly it would eventually be destroyed. On June 6, 1995, 11-year-old Lacey was under the supervision of her older sister, Darla. Both were students, but summer vacation had begun. Their mothers go to work during this time, and often the children will stay at home waiting for their parents to return. However, at 4 p.m. that day, Lacey had an appointment with the dentist, which coincided with Mary's end of her work shift. Consequently, Darla drove Lacey to the workplace, where their mother worked as an accountant in an automated tax and accounting service. It was planned that Lacey would wait until her mother finished work and then go to the appointment together. Darla later described this outing as completely ordinary. She talked with Mary for a while, and then Darla went home, planning to meet her friends later. She and her mother said goodbye and hugged, unaware that this would be their last meeting. Although Mary and Lacey were expected to be a little late coming back from the dentist, it was merely a routine checkup that wasn't supposed to take long. Meanwhile, Jesse and Darla were left alone at home. Their father was on a business trip 500 kilometers away. The siblings expected their mother and Lacey to return by 5 p.m., but as much more time passed with no sign of mother, they began to worry. At around 6 p.m., both teenagers grew increasingly worried as neither returned from the dentist's office. Lacey is too young to have her own plans, and Mary had no other plans for the evening. Even if something had changed, Mary always called the children to inform them if she would be late. Her uncharacteristic absence without warning heightened their concern. Darla assumed her mother might be late at work, so she called the office but received no answer. Concerned, she then headed to the dental clinic, but there was no sign of Mary or Lacey. Time passed, and as the sun began to set, Darla contacted their father to share their growing worries. He suggested they leave the house and look around the area, considering that Mary's car might have broken down or she might need help. Jesse and Darla searched the vicinity but found nothing. They returned to their house and reported their findings to their father, prompting him to contact the police. A dispatch officer spoke to James to gather necessary information. He provided details about where Mary worked, the car she drove, and their trip to the dentist set for around 4 p.m. The most alarming fact was that Mary and Lacey never reached the dentist. Law enforcement took James's report seriously, confirming that no one had arrived at the dental office. Around midnight, an officer was dispatched to check Mary's workplace. Upon arrival at the parking lot in front of the building, the patrolman noticed a pickup truck parked alone. After checking the license plate, he confirmed it was indeed Mary Phillips' vehicle. This discovery intensified fears that something had gone terribly wrong. The car was intact and locked, so the officer decided to check the office where Mary worked. He knocked on the door, which surprisingly opened because it was unlocked. Upon entering, he found the lights were off and had to use a flashlight to explore. It was then that he discovered something horrifying: the body of a woman covered in blood, with her hands tightly bound behind her back. A cord from a household appliance was wrapped around her neck, and her clothes were pulled down. The officer immediately realized she had been brutally beaten. A pulse check indicated she was dead. The body was cold, suggesting she had been killed hours earlier. The office resembled the aftermath of a violent struggle, with blood scattered around, intensifying concerns that the perpetrator might still be present. The patrolman called for reinforcements and continued to carefully inspect the rooms while waiting for his colleagues to arrive. He checked the office and then moved to the utility rooms, where he noticed a trail of blood leading to another door, which was also unlocked. He entered without any problems and saw a gruesome scene. In the middle of the room was a chair to which a girl was tied, also covered in blood. There was especially a lot of blood. Her face showed clear signs of having received several blows to the head. Thought the girl was dead, he managed to take several pictures of the second victim when she suddenly woke up, opened her eyes, and looked in his direction. Later, the police officer recalled this moment as one of the most terrible and unexpected in his life, as if he had seen a dead person returning to life. The patrolman immediately turned to his colleagues and, in addition to requesting reinforcements, asked them to call for doctors. He freed the girl and tried to provide first aid, but it quickly became obvious that she was in serious condition and that only doctors could fully help her. Despite her injuries, she was conscious and could speak. She clearly stated that her name was Lacey Phillips. The only thing that worried her was her mother's condition. She asked several times what had happened to Mary and if everything was okay with her, but the policeman distracted her from these troubling thoughts, not telling her the truth. The medics arrived a few minutes later, and Lacey was urgently taken to the nearest medical facility. On the way, she regained consciousness and then lost it again. Lacey had sustained a serious head injury from several strong blows to the head with a blunt object. Additionally, marks were found on her neck indicating strangulation, and in addition to sustaining a fracture in her cranial vault, she had a broken jaw. Mary's husband, James, was notified that something had happened to his loved ones but was given no details. He immediately packed his things and left for the city to see his daughter in the hospital to support her. He was shocked and did not understand what had happened to his family. Now, the doctors did not dare to provide a prognosis on whether the Phillips' youngest daughter, Lacey, would survive. An even greater blow was the death of 34-year-old Mary. She could not be saved and had died before the patrolman arrived. Forensic experts worked at the crime scene but were unable to find any clues that would lead to the criminal. Their only hope was Lacey, who had miraculously survived the attack, and they awaited news from the medical center with excitement. A few hours later, doctors managed to stabilize Lacey's condition. The morning after the attack, on June 7th, she woke up in hospital. She was in the intensive care unit, and they were finally able to communicate. Despite her traumatic brain injury, she remembered perfectly what had happened. Later, Lacey admitted that all of it was captured in her memory. Lacey began to recount the frightening details of how her older sister had taken her to their mother's workplace at about 3 p.m. She remained in the office until 3:45 p.m., as both of them were getting ready to go to the dentist's office for a routine checkup. The workday was almost over. But a few minutes before it ended, an unfamiliar man entered the office. He immediately headed to the desk where Mary worked. She and Mary looked at him and even stepped back. There was something frightening in his gaze, but they thought he was just a client who had come into the office. When the stranger raised his hands, it became obvious that he was not there for advice. He was wearing latex gloves. In one hand, he held a roll of wire, and in the other, a gun with which he threatened Mary and Lacey. The man announced that it was a robbery. Mary tried to cover herself and protect her daughter, but he pushed Mary's aside, knocked her to the floor, and began tying her wrists behind her back with the wire. Lacey was confused, scared, and unable to react. Everything happened too quickly. After tying up Mary, the unknown man shouted at Lacey and ordered her to follow him into another room. He brought a chair from Mary's office, placed it in the middle of the room, and forced she to sit on it while he tied her hands to the chair behind her back. She cried, begged him not to harm her and her mother. The criminal said he would not harm Mary but would hurt her daughter. After securing Lacey to the chair with wire, he immediately hit her hard on the head with the handle of the pistol. Her eyes went dark, and she lost consciousness. After which, the stranger left the room, closing the door behind him. Lacey was left alone. She was tightly tied up and couldn't even move. She felt like she was bleeding from her head. Lacey regained consciousness a few minutes later, looked around, and saw that blood was all around the chair. She was in pain, but she couldn't imagine the extent of the head injury she had sustained. She began to scream and call for help, hoping that her mother would enter the room and untie her. The door swung open, and to her horror, it was the same man again. He was furious that she was still alive and screamed, striking she again before grabbing her by the neck and beginning to strangle her until she lost consciousness once more. This lasted for several minutes. Perhaps the criminal was afraid of being caught, so he wanted to escape from the building as quickly as possible. He believed he had killed Lacey, turned off the light, and left the room. The criminal immediately fled the office. Several hours passed. Lacey came to her senses but then lost consciousness again. Each time she regained consciousness, she tried to get free and call for her mother but received no response. Her hands were tightly bound with metal wire. Lacey grew weaker with every minute. The only hope for salvation was the thought that someone would find them. About 8 hours passed during which Lacey remained locked in the dark room, bleeding. She was half asleep, could barely move, and had lost all strength. Suddenly, the girl heard a faint clicking sound coming from the next room. At first, she was scared that it was the attacker, but then the sounds were repeated next to her, and flashes appeared in her half-asleep state. Lacey realized it looked like a photo shoot. She confirmed it when she opened her eyes and saw someone taking her picture. Fortunately, it was not the criminal. It was a policeman who had arrived at the office to check on Lacey. Lacey remembered how the ambulance had arrived, how the policeman freed her. She was losing and regaining consciousness on the way to the intensive care unit of the nearest children's hospital. All this time, the doctors talked to her to keep her conscious. At each moment of clarity, Lacey tried to find out what had happened to her mother, but she never received an answer to any of her questions. Even now, while talking to the police, she still did not know that Mary was dead. After the police visit to the hospital, her father, brother, and sister came into the ward. They brought balloons and soft toys. Lacey still believed that her mother, like her, was in the hospital and had probably also suffered at the hands of the attacker but was still alive. The whole day of June 7th, Lacey's relatives spent with she, but they never answered any of her questions about Mary. She saw how, with each passing moment, her father's eyes filled with tears. Doubt began to creep in, but at that time, Lacey was still too weak and simply pushed away the bad thoughts. In the evening, James gathered his strength, went up to his daughter, knelt down, and hugged her. In a trembling voice, he told her that Mary was now in heaven with her great-grandmother. The detective leading the investigation could not afford to be sentimental, as the criminal responsible for the attack was still on the loose and might strike again. The local residents were in danger, and the bloodthirsty killer had to be stopped urgently. When Lacey found out about this, she realized with horror that she was the only chance for the police to catch the criminal. She also understood that she was in great danger and that the attacker might return to eliminate her as an unwanted witness. In the office where he committed the murder and attempted murder, the stranger left no traces. He managed to avoid leaving evidence by using latex gloves, which Lacey reported. However, he left biological fluids after abusing Mary, but their examination would take time, and the research capabilities of that era were much more modest. Therefore, the results only allowed the police to limit the circle of suspects, which at that point was not substantial. The criminal was likely an experienced killer. He knew how to avoid being caught, acted covertly, and used gloves. However, the police still had the main source of information, Lacey. She remembered the attacker perfectly and provided a very detailed description, including the smallest details of his clothing, appearance. Having learned that this man had taken her mother away from her, she was determined to bring him to justice. Describing the face of the criminal, Lacey suddenly recalled one important detail. Before he struck her on the head, while he had tied her hands with metal wire, she noticed a teardrop tattoo on his face, as well as a tattoo on his arm. This detail allowed the detectives to match these distinctive features with registered criminals. Detectives quickly identified a 31-year-old man named Jack Jones, who had the tattoos described by Lacey. Jack was well known to the local police for multiple robbery charges, but investigators did not suspect that he was responsible for much more serious crimes. The police quickly discovered Jack Jones's last known residence and went to apprehend him, expecting that he might already be on the run. To their surprise, Jack personally opened the door, did not seem alarmed at all. He was immediately brought to the station for questioning. While being taken to the department, detectives contemplated what tactics to employ to get the criminal to talk. To their surprise, no tricks were needed. As soon as Jack was asked about Mary and Lacey, he calmly began to recount what had happened. He stated that he had seen Mary standing in her office early that same day while he was driving past. As soon as it happened, he decided that he wanted to kill her because he found her incredibly beautiful. He returned later, knowing that the office closed around 4 p.m., when there should have been no one there. However, he saw a girl there but did not retreat. He tied up Lacey in the room because he was not interested in her. His goal from the very beginning was Mary. He bound her hands behind her back, placed her on the floor, abused her, and then cut a cord from the kettle, wrapped it around her neck, and began to strangle her. According to Jack Jones, this murder was an act of revenge for the abuse of his wife, as her attacker remained unpunished. The investigation revealed that Jack's wife did report the crime to the police, but later she retracted her statement against the abuser, leading to his release. Jack insisted that his wife was indeed abused, but why Mary had to pay for it remained a mystery. On the evening of June 7, 1995, Jack Jones was arrested for the abuse and murder of Mary. He was also charged with the attempted murder of Lacey. When the Phillips family was informed, everyone breathed a sigh of relief, as no one could be sure that the killer wouldn't come back to eliminate the only witness. However, their fight was just beginning, as Jack still had to be brought to justice in court. Thanks to his confession, there should not be any problems. Lacey did not want to attend the hearings to avoid further trauma, but the existing evidence against him was enough to send him to prison. The trial began in April of 1996. By that time, law enforcement officials had carefully reviewed all the evidence against Jack. It was decided to show in court a recording of Lacey's account, made on a dictaphone while she was recovering from her injuries in the hospital. She quickly recovered physically, but psychologically she was broken. However, even in such a state, she wanted justice. The defense attorney tried to refute her statement, but the jury did not believe him. The defendant himself pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, claiming that he was not himself during the attack on the mother and daughter because he was treating his bipolar disorder with illegal drugs. His arguments about a difficult childhood were also unconvincing. Ultimately, the jury found Jack Jones guilty on all counts. For the murder of Mary Phillips, he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. For the brutal beating of Lacey, he received a life sentence along with an additional 30 years and a fine of $15,000 for the attempted murder of Lacey. But this was not the end of Jack's criminal story. While on death row, he confessed to another murder, that of 32-year-old Lori Barrett. This incident occurred during her 5-day vacation in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where she planned to visit friends. Because she arrived late, she didn't want to bother her friend's family and decided to stay at a hotel instead. That evening, Barrett went to a local bar to relax after her trip. There, she met a young man with several tattoos. According to several witnesses who spoke to the police, Barrett was seen drinking with the stranger until about 2 a.m. in the hotel patio. After that, they went up in the elevator together, presumably to her room. The next day, she failed to show up for a planned barbecue with her friend. Later, a cleaning lady went to her room and found her body, which had been abused and strangled. Jack Jones confessed to this murder in 2005, claiming that he liked Barrett right away, and they spent the whole evening together before going up to her room. However, the details of what happened next and the reason for the attack remain unknown, as Jack refused to disclose them. For the trial related to this case, he was extradited to Florida and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, after which he was returned to Arkansas to await execution. Interestingly, Jack Jones could have been caught and convicted of this crime while it was still being committed. A composite sketch was created based on witness statements and footage from the hotel's security cameras. His sister identified him after seeing the sketch in a newspaper and showed it to their father, who insisted that she never talk about the event or show Jack's image to anyone else. She complied, remaining silent. Jack's father then put him on a bus and sent him to Arkansas to prevent anyone from recognizing him based on the composite sketch. Unfortunately, it cost Mary Phillips her life. When Jack's family was questioned about the story, they admitted that they knew their son had met with Barrett before the attack but did not believe that Jack could be involved in such a brutal crime. Consequently, the father decided not to contact the police. They described Jack as a very complex person who grew increasingly gloomy and cruel with age, taking out his anger not only on his siblings but also on his parents. However, they justified his behavior until the last moment, believing he could be loving and gentle. They did not think he was capable of murder. On April 24, 2017, 52-year-old Jack Jones was executed for the murder of Mary Phillips at the Cummins unit, along with abuser-murderer Marcel Williams, marking the first double execution in the country in 17 years. Jones and Williams were 2 of 4 inmates executed in Arkansas in April 2017, the other 2 being convicted murderers Liddell Lee and Kenneth Williams. Jones's last meal consisted of fried chicken, fries with tartar sauce, beef jerky, 3 candy bars, a chocolate milkshake, and juice. Lacey, now grown, was present at the execution. When Jack was given his last words, he turned to the victim's daughter, tenderly called her by name, and claimed that he had perceived her as his daughter all his life. Naturally, this only caused her disgust and anger. After the execution, it was revealed that Jack Jones was involved in another murder. Just before his execution, he gave his sister a letter he had written in 2006, with instructions to open it a year after his execution. She respected his request. When she finally opened the letter from her brother, she read a terrible confession. On May 2, 1983, 20-year-old Regina Harrison left her house in the evening to ride her bike. At that time, 19-year-old Jack Jones was riding his bike towards the beach. He meets Regina, who catches his eye and secretly follows her to a deserted street, where he attacks, abuses, and kills her. They began to search for her that same evening after Regina did not return home at the appointed time. The next day, her body was found in a nearby park with signs of abuse and strangulation, which became the cause of death. During the investigation of this crime, detectives found a witness who identified the criminal as Ronald Stewart, who was passing by the park at the approximate time of the murder. In January of 1985, Ronald pleaded guilty and was then sentenced to 50 years in prison. He died behind bars of cancer in 2008. It later turned out that the only reason an innocent man took the blame was that Ronald Stewart had already committed a series of abuses of other girls. He had been convicted of those crimes and was now afraid of the death penalty, so he made a deal with the prosecution and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Ronald never denied his guilt during his lifetime, but DNA testing later showed that he was not guilty of Regina's murder. After Jack Jones' sister, Lynn, went to the police and handed over the letter confessing to the murder, DNA testing was conducted, and in February 2019, his words were officially confirmed. Jack was behind Regina's murder. Before the execution, he lost one of his legs due to diabetes. He stated that he was ready to die, and it remains unknown why he confessed to the murders of Mary and Barrett but did not do the same regarding Regina Harrison until he only mentioned it in a letter to his sister. After the execution, it became official that Jack had killed at least 3 young women. Law enforcement officials now believe that he could have been involved in more brutal crimes. Mary's widower, after Jack's death, spoke out against people who expressed support for the criminal. There were supporters of the killer who believed that he deserved a lighter sentence and demanded that the execution be canceled. However, James said that he did not believe they would have maintained such a loyal attitude towards the criminal if he had killed their loved ones. Lacey, after talking to journalists, said that she could finally move on with her life. Justice had finally prevailed, and this dangerous criminal would no longer be able to harm anyone. However, even despite the execution, she believed that she would never be able to completely free herself from the consequences of the horrors she had endured. The case of Ellie Costile. Alexandria Coastal, known as Ellie, was born on September 11, 1997 in St. Louis. As a blonde-haired girl, she grew up with the care and love of her parents, Cindy and Keith, who supported her endeavors. Ellie excelled academically and in sports like track and field and golf. Her dream was to attend the University of Mississippi, and she became a student there, living in a dormitory in Oxford and being popular among her peers. Friends and relatives described her as a lively and energetic person. Summer on campus is quiet, with few students remaining. Those who stay attend extra lectures or prepare for next year, then unwind at local bars and nightclubs in the evening. Ellie Costile, an upperclassman, stayed to improve her knowledge, and having just passed a key exam, was planning to celebrate with friends. A popular spot among young people in Oxford Square is a small bar that serves pizza and drinks. Its lively atmosphere, complete with dim lighting, loud music, and a colorful selection of drinks, makes it a place where the bartenders know many customers by name. On the evening of July 19th, Ellie met up with friends at this bar, where they chatted and had a good time. Despite her efforts to have fun, Ellie seemed tense and spent most of the evening texting someone on her phone. After having a couple of cocktails, she discreetly left the bar. This would be one of the last times Ellie Costile, a University of Mississippi student, was seen in public. On July 20th, 2019, around 10:30 a.m., police officers stumbled upon a young woman's body near an abandoned fishing camp by Sardis Lake, about 30 miles from the university, during their routine patrol. The victim had been shot 9 times in the back, and investigators found 11 shell casings at the scene. A purse containing a driver's license and a student ID belonging to 21-year-old Alexandria Costile, a University of Mississippi student, was found nearby on the roadside. Ellie's death shocked the University of Mississippi community. Her father confirmed the news on Facebook, saying police told them Saturday that she'd been a crime victim. Witness interviews established that a few days before the incident, Ellie's parents had visited her from St. Louis, during which she expressed her enthusiasm for the upcoming academic year at the university, with no reservations about staying on campus for the summer. Moreover, data from her Apple Watch revealed that following a phone conversation with her mother, Ellie sent several messages to Brandon. An examination of these messages revealed that 3 months prior to the incident, Ellie had confided in Brandon about some shocking news. Since Brandon was the last known person to have communicated with the victim, he became a person of interest to the police. A closer look at their messages further disclosed that Ellie and Brandon had been in an on-again, off-again romantic relationship. Brandon Theld, a tall, dark-haired young man with an athletic build, was also a student at the University of Mississippi, hailing from Fort Worth, Texas, and raised in a well-mannered family. In 2016, when Ellie met Brandon as a freshman, she fell for him immediately. The young couple started dating, but they never formally declared themselves as an official couple. While Ellie's feelings for Brandon were genuine, he never showed a serious commitment towards her. Ellie's friends knew that her relationship with Brandon was troubled. They frequently argued, even in public. The couple would often break up, only to get back together after a while. On April 12, 2019, Ellie told Brandon that she was pregnant, but he didn't respond. She sent him numerous texts and voice messages, but he ignored her. 3 months later, Brandon finally replied, saying that he didn't want a child because it would ruin his life. He refused to help or support Ellie, telling her to just take a pill or make a doctor's appointment to deal with the situation. Despite being deeply in love, Ellie desperately wanted to talk to Brandon in person, but he kept refusing. On the night of July 19th, Ellie went to a local bar with her friends at 11:52 p.m. Surveillance cameras showed her leaving the bar and taking a taxi home. About 30 minutes later, Brandon called her at 1:58 a.m. on July 20th. Ellie got into a vehicle, unaware that it would be her last ride. She headed to an abandoned fishing camp by Sardis Lake, where Brandon was waiting. The drive to the camp was supposed to take around 45 minutes. Witnesses reported hearing gunshots in that area between 2:15 and 2:30 a.m. On Sunday afternoon, investigators contacted Brandon Theld, requesting him to visit the police station to discuss Ellie Costio. Initially, he made excuses to avoid the meeting, but eventually promised to appear on Monday at 8:30 a.m. However, when Brandon failed to show up at the police station on Monday, July 22, 2019, investigators began tracking his phone's location. The data revealed that he was heading back to his home in Fort Worth, Texas. As a result, authorities issued an alert for his pickup truck. 2 days later, Brandon was finally arrested when he stopped at a gas station in Memphis. Brandon Theld, a 22-year-old, was arrested and charged with homicide in the local area. Despite this, his lawyer and father insisted that he was innocent. As the Oxford community tried to make sense of the violent death of one of their own, the death of Ellie Costio quickly drew national attention. Reporters from all over the country came to Oxford, eager to learn more about Ellie and the person accused of killing her. Brandon Theld maintained his innocence until the end, but the evidence was against him. A gun matching the shooting was found in his possession, along with bloody clothing. He had gone to Texas to get his father's gun, suggesting premeditation. His internet history showed searches for abortion services and ways to avoid punishment for a crime. A letter to his parents revealed his dark thoughts and feelings, where he mentioned that something in him just didn't work, and that he thought it was the end for him. Investigator Jared Bundren shared some previously known details about the shocking crime with the public. He revealed that Ellie had told Brandon she suspected she was pregnant, but Brandon didn't want her to have the baby. This led to numerous arguments between the couple, with Ellie wanting to meet in person to discuss the situation. Brandon refused to meet until the day of the incident. The police wanted to question Brandon and asked him to come to the station for questioning. However, Brandon resisted and made excuses for not being able to come in. Concerned, the police began tracking his cell phone and located him. They found that Brandon was heading to his home in Fort Worth, Texas. Authorities alerted nearby police departments, and Brandon was arrested when he stopped to refuel at a gas station in Memphis. Upon his arrest, the police found blood on him and a pistol in his truck that matched the weapon used in Ellie's murder. Despite Brandon's claims of innocence, the police charged him with the crime. Morgan acted quickly after hearing about the student's death. seeking guidance from administrators. She noted the university's past experiences with student suicides and accidents, but this was a new situation. Morgan briefly addressed Ellie's passing in class, alerted counselors, and allowed students to postpone exams if needed. She expressed sympathy, saying her heart went out to Ellie's parents and friends, stressing that parents shouldn't have to bury their children. As it turned out, Ellie Kotile, in her need for support, had told friends that she was pregnant with Brandon Thell's child. Her sisters knew she was pregnant and that she had told Brandon. A classmate said that he was very upset about it, worrying about how it would ruin his life and future. He was angry that she wouldn't have an abortion, but she said she didn't believe in that. Ellie tried to end her 17-week pregnancy using harmful methods like excessive drinking and substance use. Brandon knew but was seeing someone else. He wanted her to abortion, but she morally opposed it. He was abusive, frequently breaking up with her in anger, then returning apologetic and she'd take him back. Ellie Kotile's shocked friends and classmates struggled to cope with the news and paid tribute to their friend on social media. Her friend Anna Pasco mentioned that it was just hard for her because when she saw Ellie's face, all she could think about was what Ellie went through, what she thought, and what she said. Anna added that it was very, very difficult. On Thursday evening in her hometown of St. Louis, a memorial service was held for Ellie Kotile at the request of the community. However, no public statements were made in Oxford about memorial events. Only black ribbons encircling the majestic white column of the women's houses, including Alpha where Ellie lived, served as a reminder of the tragedy. The young student's demise unsettled the entire state. Despite withholding key facts for investigative purposes, several news agencies conducted in-depth investigations and uncovered surveillance footage of Ellie Kotile near the location where her body was discovered early Saturday morning. The footage, captured on cameras, shows Kotile with a man at a 24-hour store in the Harmontown area. A store's owner revealed that police visited his store on Sunday to review the surveillance footage. However, he claimed that the investigators didn't explain the reason for their visit and took some evidence with them when they left. According to him, the video footage is erased every 72 hours, making it impossible to retrieve the captured footage. The business owner expressed his shock, saying, "We've never had any problems or violent incidents here. This is a small town, it's quiet, everyone knows each other. This is just madness." Lafayette County Sheriff's Office keeps investigation details quiet to ensure the perpetrator is brought to justice, says Coroner Rocky Kennedy, who explains that revealing too much now could jeopardize the case. Kennedy shrugged off intense media scrutiny, saying every case is equally important and gets the same level of attention. Michelle Miller stressed the need to recognize relationship warning signs after Ellie's death, questioning if it could have been prevented. Brandon Theld was charged and sentenced to life, with parole possible at 65, now serving at the Mississippi State Penitentiary. Brandon Theld showed remorse at his trial, apologizing to Ellie Kotile's family and his own for her death. A key piece of evidence was that Ellie was never pregnant, leaving us to wonder why she fabricated it. She seemed to believe the lie, hoping it would win Brandon's heart. Tragically, her loved ones still grieve. The case of Ryan Poston. Ryan Poston was born on December 30th, 1982, in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky, to Lisa and Jay Poston. He had a strong and loving bond with his three sisters, Allison, Catherine, and Elizabeth, throughout his life. Growing up, Ryan had the opportunity to travel extensively and attend schools in Switzerland and the Philippines. This exposure broadened his horizons and gave him an adventurous spirit. Ryan was also known for his striking good looks, which, coupled with his charismatic personality, made him stand out in a crowd. After graduating from high school, Ryan attended Indiana University, where he earned a degree in political science, history, and geography. He excelled academically and graduated with honors in 2005. Following in the footsteps of his family members, Ryan pursued a career in law. He enrolled in the Salmon P. Chase College of Law at Northern Kentucky University, driven by his admiration for the legal profession. His esteemed grandfather and uncle, both practicing attorneys, were his role models. Ryan's ultimate goal was to own a successful law firm. While in Cincinnati, Ohio, Ryan dedicated himself to helping people who couldn't afford expensive lawyers. Despite being young, he had already built a strong reputation, and many sought his advice. He worked hard to ensure everyone had access to fair and competent legal representation, regardless of their financial situation. After a painful breakup in 2011, Ryan turned to his cousin Carissa for comfort and support. During a visit to Lexington, Kentucky to spend time with her, he met Shayna Hubers, a Lexington native, and his life took an unexpected turn. Shayna Hubers embodied the quintessential Southern girl, renowned for her outgoing personality and effortless ability to form friendships. Her warm and charming demeanor naturally drew people to her. After graduating high school in 2009 with a full scholarship, she continued her education at the University of Kentucky, majoring in psychology, before pursuing her master's degree in psychology at Eastern Kentucky University. Despite their 8-year age gap, Ryan was 29, while Shayna was just 21. Their feelings for each other grew increasingly undeniable. With each visit Ryan made to see his cousin Carissa in Lexington, he found himself devoting more time to Shayna. As they spent more time together, their bond deepened. Shayna began spending more time in Highland Heights, the Kentucky suburb where Ryan lived. Every weekend, she would pack a bag and visit Ryan's home, dedicating herself to taking care of him, cooking his meals, and cleaning his living space. As time went on, Ryan and Shayna's relationship grew stronger, and he took her to meet his parents. She was over the moon with excitement, telling her friends all about Ryan and even saying she wanted to become Mrs. Ryan Poston. But their promising future came to a tragic end on October 12, 2012. In a panicked call to the police, Shayna admitted to fatally shooting her boyfriend, Ryan. The details she shared revealed a devastating scene of domestic violence that had spun out of control. According to Shayna, Ryan had tried to physically abuse her, dragging her out of the house when she attempted to gather her belongings. She told the 911 dispatcher that Ryan had confronted her with a gun, leading to a physical fight. In the heat of the moment, Shayna managed to grab the gun, but she was intimidated by Ryan's size. In a state of panic, she pulled the trigger, ultimately shooting Ryan. Shayna admitted that she believed Ryan's death was inevitable, so she claimed she wanted to end his suffering. She told the 911 dispatcher that Ryan was in distress, making unusual sounds, which motivated her to shoot him several more times. Afterwards, she revealed that she left the gun on a bookshelf. Minutes after Shayna called 911 to report that she had shot her boyfriend, officers were sent to the scene. When they arrived, they told Shayna to come out of the apartment with her hands up. At first, she was hesitant, but she eventually followed their orders. As she walked out, they told her to lie face down on the ground. It was clear that Shayna was very upset as she complied with their instructions. After the officers handcuffed Shayna and put her in the back of their patrol car, they entered the apartment and found Ryan Poston's body on the dining room floor, covered in blood. Crime scene investigators arrived and examined Ryan's condo, which looked a bit messy, but nothing out of the ordinary for a 29-year-old man. They found that Ryan had a concealed carry permit and owned weapons, including the Sig Sauer semi-automatic gun that Shayna used to shoot him. Based on the evidence they gathered, the investigators concluded that Ryan was sitting at the table when Shayna opened fire. They knew this because of the blood found on the table. However, the fact that several items on the dining room table were not disturbed raised doubts about Shayna's story. If there had been a fight, the items would have been disturbed. The crime scene investigators thoroughly searched Ryan's apartment, gathering every detail. At the same time, police officers questioned Ryan's neighbors to see if they had any information that could help the case. One of Ryan's neighbors, a woman named Nikki, spoke to the detective and provided some useful insights. Nikki knew Shayna well and thought that Shayna was more committed to Ryan than he was to her. According to Nikki, the couple often had loud, angry arguments that disturbed the neighborhood. Nikki remembered a specific incident several months ago when Shayna came to her door in tears, saying she was afraid of Ryan. Shayna had told Nikki that she and Ryan had a violent fight, during which he lifted her up and threw her down the hallway, causing her injuries. Nikki believed Shayna and encouraged her to report the abuse to the police, but Shayna decided not to take legal action. At the police station, detectives took Shayna to an interrogation room to question her about the shooting of her boyfriend, Ryan. Before starting the interview, the officers read Shayna her Miranda rights, reminding her that she had the right to have an attorney present. Shayna chose to exercise this right and asked for a lawyer to be present. While waiting in the interrogation room, Shayna filled out some paperwork under the supervision of a detective. Despite having asked for a lawyer, Shayna still chatted with the detective. When asked who the victim was, Shayna calmly replied that it was the man she had killed. This response showed a clear lack of emotion, as it was obvious she knew the victim was Ryan, her long-term boyfriend. Shayna remained in the interrogation room with the detectives, maintaining that she had acted in self-defense. She recounted the events of the previous night, describing how Ryan had allegedly grabbed her by the throat and violently thrown her around the apartment. At some point during the investigation, the detective temporarily left the room, replaced by another officer. Shayna began to reveal more details about her encounter with Ryan to this new officer. She alleged that Ryan had been extremely aggressive prior to the shooting, hurling insults at her, calling her crazy, and taunting her while brandishing a gun. Shayna believed that Ryan's behavior that night was fueled by drug use, which contributed to his violent outbursts. Throughout the interview, Shayna consistently stuck to her version of the events that culminated in the shooting. She claimed that Ryan was sitting at the dining room table, handling ammunition for his Sig Sauer pistol, when she noticed him staring aggressively at her from across the table. At that moment, she became aware of his intentions and realized he was trying to evict her from his condo. Shayna confessed to picking up the gun and firing it in the midst of the chaos, hitting Ryan with a single bullet. Shayna continued to describe the incident, claiming that after shooting Ryan once, she saw him twitching. Believing it was necessary to end his suffering, she fired multiple shots, ultimately killing him. In her confession, Shayna told the detective that Ryan was vain and had mentioned wanting a nose job, so she decided to grant him his wish. She deliberately aimed her gun at his face and pulled the trigger, essentially giving him the rhinoplasty he had requested. During the intense interrogation, Shayna expressed deep concerns about the impact of the incident on her academic performance and her future romantic relationships. She confided in the detective that having a dead boyfriend would make it difficult for her to find someone to marry, especially if they discovered she had killed him in self-defense. Despite her statement, the detective arrested and charged her with Ryan's murder. Shayna seemed genuinely surprised by her arrest, maintaining that she had acted in self-defense. In 2015, Shayna's trial began, and the courtroom was filled with anticipation. The prosecutor compared Shayna to Jodi Arias, who had also been charged with murdering her boyfriend, Travis Alexander, emphasizing the striking similarities between the two cases. This heightened the tension in the courtroom as everyone awaited the outcome. The prosecutor argued that Shayna was fixated on her ex-boyfriend, Ryan. According to the prosecution, Ryan dominated Shayna's thoughts, and she constantly discussed him. During the trial, the prosecutor presented testimony from Ryan's friends, who described his plans to end the relationship with Shayna and his efforts to avoid her phone calls and messages. Despite this, Shayna continued to visit Ryan's condo in Highland Heights uninvited, including on the night of the murder. The prosecution introduced evidence that Ryan had scheduled a date with Audrey Bolt, a former Miss Ohio, on the night of the murder. This information supported the prosecution's theory that Shayna was driven by jealousy and anger towards Ryan's potential new love interest. Audrey Bolt testified that she was supposed to meet Ryan for drinks at a bar on the night of the murder, but he failed to appear. It wasn't until later that she learned of his murder. The prosecution also presented evidence that Ryan had repeatedly expressed his desire to end the relationship with Shayna in the days leading up to his death. Ryan had sought advice from his father, Jay, on how to handle the situation, and Jay had counseled him to be kind to Shayna to avoid a messy breakup. However, it appears that Shayna continued to exert control over Ryan on the day he was killed. The prosecution presented evidence of several text exchanges between Ryan and Shayna, in which Ryan clearly told her he did not want to see her that weekend because he had other commitments. Nevertheless, Shayna showed up uninvited at his condo, which was not unusual for her. The argument that ensued reached a boiling point when Ryan explicitly told Shayna their relationship was over and she could no longer control him. Prosecutors argued that this statement enraged Shayna, prompting her to pick up a gun and fatally shoot Ryan. During Shayna's trial for murdering Ryan, the prosecution showed a video of her being questioned by the police to suggest she was a cold-blooded killer. In the video, Shayna's calm behavior and responses seemed to back up the idea that she had intentionally taken Ryan's life. The footage showed her dancing and singing along to music, which seemed unusual for someone who had just killed their loved one in self-defense. Normally, people in such a situation would be distraught and crying due to the loss of life and the weight of their actions. The prosecution's goal in showing the video was to make Shayna appear detached and unemotional, implying that her actions were not those of someone who had acted in self-defense. They claimed that her lack of tears and carefree behavior proved her guilt. However, this interpretation was open to debate and up to the jury to decide. In the end, the video was a key piece of evidence in the prosecution's case against Shayna, but it was just one part of the evidence presented during the trial. Shayna's defense team stuck to a clear storyline throughout her trial, arguing that Ryan was the aggressive and violent one on the night of the incident, leading Shayna to shoot him. To back up this claim, they built a picture of Ryan's mental state, suggesting that a mix of drugs he was taking, including anti-anxiety medications and amphetamines, contributed significantly to his behavior. The defense team presented the jury with autopsy results showing the presence of these drugs in Ryan's system, strengthening their argument that the drugs influenced his actions. An expert toxicologist testified for Shayna, stating that a combination of drugs like anti-anxiety medications and amphetamines could cause someone to become violent and paranoid. This testimony aimed to provide a reasonable explanation for Shayna's actions, implying that she may not have intended to harm Ryan. During Shayna's trial in April 2015, the prosecution grew increasingly worried that she might be acquitted due to being a smart, young, and attractive woman, and that her self-defense claim might persuade the jury. However, on April 23rd, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, convicting Shayna of murdering her boyfriend, Ryan Poston. At the August 2015 sentencing hearing, Shayna persisted in shifting the blame for Ryan's death onto him, which infuriated his friends and family. Despite the overwhelming evidence presented during the trial, Shayna stuck to her claim of innocence and refused to acknowledge her role in the events. Under Kentucky law, a defendant who is deemed a victim of domestic violence can be eligible for early parole after serving just 20% of their sentence. However, the judge in this case ruled that Shayna did not meet the criteria, characterizing her crime as a premeditated murder. As a result, the judge handed down a 40-year prison sentence, making Shayna eligible for parole in 17 years, when she will be 41 years old in 2032. Shayna Hubers was sentenced, but she appealed for a new trial, which was granted by a judge in August 2016. The reason for the appeal was that one of the jurors had failed to disclose their felony conviction, which is against Kentucky law since felons are not allowed to serve on juries. Following a 4-month delay, Shayna's second trial for the murder of Ryan Poston began in August 2018. During the opening arguments, Shayna's defense attorney claimed that throughout her year-and-a-half-long relationship with Ryan, Shayna tried her best to make him happy. However, their romance suffered because of it. The attorney stated that on the very first night Shayna and Ryan met, he was violent toward her, both physically and sexually. This incident had a lasting effect on her, and it took her several weeks to respond to his messages after that. Shayna's defense lawyers claimed that her high school experience of sexual assault led to a history of alcohol abuse and promiscuity. They argued that this traumatic event contributed to her behavior on the night of the murder. The defense team aimed to create a sympathetic image of Shayna, highlighting her troubled past and arguing that she was not responsible for her actions on the night of the murder. They sought to challenge the prosecution's narrative, suggesting that her behavior was the result of a combination of factors, including a history of abuse and a toxic relationship with Ryan. The defense portrayed Shayna as a victim of domestic violence at Ryan's hands, rather than as a cold-blooded murderer. They claimed that her actions were driven not by a desire for revenge or financial gain, but by years of abuse by her former partner. According to the defense, Ryan constantly criticized Shayna about her weight and chest size, pressuring her to enlarge her breasts. This constant pressure contributed to her low self-esteem and feelings of inadequacy, the defense argued. The defense claimed that Ryan and Shayna's sexual relationship was troubled, marked by frequent disagreements and frustration from both parties. According to the defense, Ryan yearned for a more romantic and intimate connection, but this desire was not fulfilled, leading to a growing rift between them. To support this claim, the defense presented evidence that Shayna had sought an injection to improve her romantic life, which was meant to address the couple's sexual difficulties and strengthen their bond. However, the defense argued that Ryan's consistent rejection and disinterest worsened the strain on their relationship, causing Shayna to become increasingly frustrated and isolated. Moreover, the defense alleged that Ryan often broke up with Shayna, only to engage in conversations with other women. In contrast, the prosecution stated that while Ryan Poston was not a perfect boyfriend, he was not abusive. They argued that Shayna did not act in self-defense when she fatally shot Ryan, but rather because he had ended their relationship that night. The prosecution claimed that it was time for Ryan to break up with Shayna, as she refused to leave him alone despite the breakup, demonstrating her inability to move on from the relationship. One of Ryan's co-workers testified that the breakup between Ryan and Shayna would be permanent this time because Ryan had always avoided breaking up with Shayna in person. According to the co-worker, Shayna had made every effort to keep Ryan. The prosecution presented text messages in which Shayna told her friends that she and Ryan's romantic encounters had brought them closer together. However, Shayna testified that these encounters had actually driven them apart. In another text message exchange, Shayna asked Ryan for sex, but Ryan was taking antidepressants, which had reduced his sex drive due to the medication's side effects. However, when Shayna testified, she claimed that Ryan had forced her into sexual intercourse. After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Shayna guilty of murdering Ryan, despite contradictory testimonies and conflicting evidence. During the sentencing hearing, Shayna's mother emotionally addressed the judge, sharing stories of her daughter's singing talent, which had earned her multiple college scholarships. Through tears, she begged the jury to consider granting Shayna parole, arguing that her daughter still had the potential to positively impact people's lives. The mother acknowledged, however, that her pleas did not minimize the grief and pain experienced by Ryan Poston's family. Shayna was given a life sentence with no chance of parole. As part of her sentence, she must serve at least 17 years before becoming eligible for parole in 2032. She is currently serving her sentence at the Kentucky Correctional Institute for Women in Pewee Valley, Kentucky. The case of Rowena Irani. Rowena Irani was born in Karachi, Pakistan, on February 18, 1994. She was the daughter of Taran and Bam Irani. When Rowena was 10 years old, her family moved to Wichita, Kansas, in search of better opportunities. Her parents made the decision to provide a brighter future for Rowena and her brother, Rashid, in the United States. However, the move was not an easy one. Despite this, Rowena overcame the initial challenges and became a determined, sociable, and compassionate young woman. In 2012, she graduated from Wichita Heights High School and later enrolled at Wichita State University. She's still living at home while pursuing a degree in psychology. Her dream was to earn a master's degree and become a youth counselor. Her mother was very proud of Rowena's hard work and dedication to her studies. From the beginning, the Irani family's sacrifices paid off for their children. In addition to her academic goals, Rowena wanted to serve her community and help other young people reach their full potential. She began working at the Wichita Children's Home, a shelter for abandoned, abused, and emotionally troubled youth. Rowena developed close relationships with the children in her care, demonstrating her admirable ability to empathize and support them. Rowena gently woke the children each morning and made sure to say goodbye to them in the evening. The children looked forward to sharing their daily experiences, no matter how small, with her after school. The CEO highlighted Rowena's attentive listening and genuine empathy for each child. She affirmed that the children deserved to be treated with kindness and understanding. Additionally, Rowena guided the children in setting goals and providing practical strategies to achieve them, demonstrating her dedication to their well-being. Rowena dedicated herself to helping troubled people. With an exceptional academic record as a psychologist, she discovered her happiness in helping others. In May 2016, Rowena ran into Dane Thomas Owens at her brother's wedding. Dane came from a wealthy Kansas family and had joined the United States Army after graduating from high school. Dane was abruptly terminated from her military service due to a severe traumatic brain injury sustained from an explosive device. After being medically discharged, Dane returned to Wichita and enrolled at Kansas State University while continuing her education, like Rowena. Rowena and Dane quickly developed a deep affection for each other. However, there were some worrying signs regarding Dane's possessive behavior, controlling tendencies, and impulsiveness. Rowena's family and friends were concerned that Dane was moving too quickly toward marriage and starting a family, although Rowena seemed hesitant. At 22, Rowena wanted to focus on finishing college before considering a serious commitment like marriage. Her boyfriend's urgency and determination to get married made Rowena feel anxious, and she believed that the relationship was moving too fast. When she asked for independence and time alone early in the relationship, Dane responded with a letter filled with misery and desperation, begging her not to leave him. He desperately stated that he could not live without her and hinted at the possibility of self-harm. Ultimately, she did not end the relationship. Initially, Dane seemed to accept Rowena's views when she stated that she was not ready to get married and start a family. However, after only a week, he began to relentlessly press for an engagement, a wedding, and a future family. His behavior increasingly suggests that he sees Rowena as a target to be conquered rather than treating her as a girlfriend. He seems determined to keep her in a family role rather than supporting her in her academic and career endeavors. This imbalance in the relationship causes Rowena to become extremely anxious and doubtful about their compatibility. Why? In September 2016, Rowena observed an increase in Dane's violent behavior and felt compelled to share her concerns with her brother, Rashid, who was a police officer. Rowena recounted several disturbing incidents, including Dane's boasting about the brutal murders he claimed to have committed while serving in the military, such as killing women and children while deployed in Afghanistan. These revelations left Rowena deeply disturbed. Even more troubling was Dane's admission of his intention to kill a girl he had dated. He confessed that after being dumped, he had become vengeful and unstable, seriously considering murdering his ex. Rush had agreed that Dane posed a real threat and warned that he might commit acts of violence against the girl. On September 23rd, after a disagreement about ending the relationship, Rowena decided to permanently end her relationship with Dane Owens and cease all contact with him. She blocked his phone number and social media profiles, hoping to avoid the emotionally abusive and disturbing behavior she had previously tolerated. However, instead of accepting Rowena's decision, her ex-boyfriend began plotting his revenge. Although Dane was still recovering from recent shoulder surgery and unable to properly operate a gun, he became emotionally overwhelmed and purchased a .45 caliber handgun on October 3rd, more than a week after their breakup. Dane arrived at Rowena's home in a stealthy and unexpected manner while the rest of her family was away. Surveillance cameras captured him parking his car away from the Irani family home before approaching in broad daylight. He attempted to conceal the illegal gun by strapping it to his arm, which was in a sling. Dane broke into Rowena's home without her knowledge. Upon encountering her, he shot and killed her without warning. This act of violence and cruelty was not motivated by passion, but rather was a calculated and deliberate act of a pathological person. After brutally attacking Rowena, Dane quickly fled the scene through the rear exit of the house and drove away in a hurry to avoid arrest. Along the way, he stopped to dispose of vital evidence in several ponds throughout the Wichar area, including a pistol magazine and Rowena's cell phone. Meanwhile, Rowena was left alone, severely injured, and bleeding profusely in the house for hours. Around 4 p.m., Rowena's mother, Tarun, finished off work. Tarun was confused because Rowena had not picked her up as usual and was unable to contact her daughter. A short time later, a co-worker of Tarun's drove her home. When Tarun entered the house, she was confronted with a horrifying scene: Rowena lying motionless on the floor, surrounded by blood and with a severe head injury. Tarun frantically called emergency services, but Rowena's injuries were too severe. Rowena's condition became critical after being shot and losing a significant amount of blood. She fought for her life for nearly 24 agonizing hours at Wesley Medical Center while her family remained by her side, hoping for a miracle. However, the worst happened. Rowena passed away on October 4th at the age of 22, ending a promising life in a senseless act of violence. Rowena's family was devastated by her death, but they were determined to find justice. Rushd quickly directed investigators to focus on the person who needed to be investigated: Rowena's ex-boyfriend, Dane Owens. In the final days of her life, Rowena had been subjected to fear and oppression from Dane. Therefore, finding and questioning Dane became a priority for investigators. When arrested and brought to the police station, Dane confessed that he harbored resentment toward Rowena for ending their relationship. During intense questioning, he attempted to explain himself with his version of events. He claimed that Rowena's death was an accident, a blatant lie that was completely inconsistent with the evidence gathered. According to his testimony to investigators, Dane stated that he went to Rowena's home to discuss mending their broken relationship, hoping for a happy ending. He admitted to visiting unannounced and carrying a loaded .45 caliber handgun, but did not explain why he had the weapon. However, Dane claimed that the gun was hidden in his wristband and that he had no intention of threatening or harming Rowena. When Dane entered the home looking for her, he said Rowena suddenly turned the corner, startling him. In a defensive response, due to his PTSD from serving in the military, he alleged that he accidentally fired the gun at Rowena in that moment of panic. He told detectives that he witnessed the moment the bullet accidentally hit Rowena in the head, causing her to fall to the ground. He was so distraught after the accident that he fled the scene and then disposed of the evidence. Although he claimed that the shooting was an accident triggered by his combat experience, detectives believed that was a clumsy lie. There is a strong body of evidence indicating that the murder was a carefully planned and premeditated act committed by Dane seeking revenge. This includes security footage from the crime scene, his confession of approaching Rowena surreptitiously with a loaded gun, his attempts to conceal evidence, and, most notably, the execution-style gunshot wound to the head. In November 2018, Dane Owens finally went to trial to face charges of brutally murdering Rowena after years of frustrating delays. The prosecution presented a strong and compelling case, with a significant amount of direct evidence. They built a narrative that portrayed Dane as controlling and possessive, often resorting to violence when faced with rejections, which ultimately led to Rowena's death. After deliberating for just 3 hours, the jury returned a unanimous verdict, finding Dane guilty of first-degree murder and aggravated burglary. In Kansas, these charges automatically carry a life sentence. Dane was punished for cruelly taking away Rowena's promising life because his own self-esteem was hurt. He will have to wait at least 25 years before he can be considered for parole. However, due to the brutal nature of his crimes, his chances of obtaining parole are slim. He is currently incarcerated in a holding cell at the Hutchinson Correctional Facility in Hutchinson, Kansas, according to official court documents. When we reflect on the tragic events surrounding Rowena Irani, we are confronted with the painful truth about domestic violence and its terrible consequences. Rowena's life was cut short by the actions of someone she loved. We must come together to support victims of domestic violence and hold perpetrators accountable for their actions. Rowena's story serves as an important reminder that love should never be accompanied by fear or violence. We hope that she will be remembered and that her story inspires efforts to build equal, respectful relationships and create a safe world where everyone is valued. Sofia Maria Martinez was born on November 14, 1981, in El Paso, Texas. Her parents, Juan and Maria, immigrated from Mexico in the late 1970s in search of a better life. They worked multiple jobs to support their daughters. She grew up alongside her 2 sisters, her older sister Dulce and her younger sister Marianne. Since a young age, they have shared a close bond. When Sofia was 12, family tensions arose, and her parents divorced in 1995. 3 sisters live with their mother, who later remarried a successful man named Iladio and had 2 sons with him. Meanwhile, Juan began a new family, leading to reduced contact with his daughters from his first marriage. Despite this, Sofia did not hold any resentment toward her father and developed a good relationship with her stepfather. Sofia grew up to be kind, outgoing, and compassionate, often helping her mother with the younger children and providing them with support. She had a particularly strong bond with her younger sister, and they were best friends. At 15, Sofia took a part-time job as a sales associate at a local mall, saving money diligently over the years. She dreamed of owning a bright red Pontiac. Knowing about her dream, her mother and stepfather gifted her the remaining amount she needed to buy the car when she turned 18. In November 1999, Sofia proudly drove her brand new car off the dealership lot, a vehicle she had long admired. She took great care of it, keeping it clean inside and out, and drove it carefully. The car was a source of pride for her, and she never allowed anyone else to drive it. By the year 2000, Sofia was preparing for her graduation and was excited about the upcoming senior prom. She carefully selected the perfect dress, shoes, and accessories for the big night. Weekends were spent shopping with her sister, trying on outfits, planning hairstyles, and choosing makeup. In February, the senior yearbook photos were taken, capturing students in their graduation caps and gowns, and Sofia was filled with joy, eager to start college. She planned to pursue a history major at the prestigious University of Texas, with the ambition of becoming a teacher. Unfortunately, Sophia's dreams would never be realized. Although she had many friends, she had never been in a serious relationship. She focused on her schoolwork and job rather than dating. While she sometimes accepted invitations from boys interested in her, none of those dates turned into anything significant. In early March, her coworker Justin suggested setting her up on a blind date with a friend of his. After some initial hesitation, she agreed, and they planned to meet on the evening of Friday, March 10th. They decided to go to a popular nightclub that allowed entry to those 18 and older, unlike most places that required patrons to be 21. On the evening of March 10th, 2000, Sophia hurried home from school, excited to prepare for her blind date. She tried on at least 10 different outfits, stepping out each time for her family's feedback. Ultimately, they all agreed she looked stunning in a bright red evening dress that flattered her figure while remaining elegant and modest. She applied her makeup, styled her hair in soft curls, put on a pair of heels, and carried a small clutch bag. The final touch was her favorite perfume. By 10 p.m., she was completely ready. She entered the living room looking glamorous and twirled to show off her outfit. Her family was impressed, confident that she would make a great impression. She promised to be home no later than 2 a.m. since she had a work shift at the mall the next day, and no one was particularly worried. She was responsible and always kept her promises. At 10:10 p.m., Sophia left the house with a bright smile, climbed into her beloved red Pontiac, and waved goodbye to her family as they watched from the window. None of them could have imagined that it would be the last time they saw her alive. The following morning, her younger sister Mary peeked into her room and noticed something odd. She was missing, and her bed was not just neatly made, it looked untouched. It seemed she had left for work, yet her employee badge sat on the vanity, and her usual work shoes were in the corner by the closet. Mary informed her mother, and at that moment, the phone rang. It was a call from Sophia's employer, reporting that she hadn't shown up for her shift, something unprecedented. This alarmed Sophia's family, who were unsure about what to do next. Since she didn't have a cell phone, her family started calling the landlines of her friends, classmates, and coworkers. Unfortunately, no one had seen her since the previous night, and they did not know how to contact the boys she was with. They also reached out to local hospitals, worried that she might have been in an accident. By the evening, without any updates on her whereabouts, the family decided to go to the police to report her missing. They took a recent photo of her and provided a detailed description of her outfit when she left home, as well as specific information about the car she was driving. On Saturday, March 11th, police made a disturbing discovery in the New Mexico desert. They found an abandoned red Pontiac about 100 yards off the highway connecting Texas and New Mexico. The passenger side window had a bullet hole, and there were dark, dried stains resembling blood on the seat, steering wheel, and headrest. Experienced officers quickly suspected foul play and feared that the driver might be seriously injured or worse. The car was sent to a forensic lab for analysis. However, since the discovery occurred in a different state, law enforcement struggled to find a direct connection to Sophia. After checking the car's registration, authorities confirmed that the red Pontiac belonged to Maria Martinez from Texas. They contacted her to see if the car had been stolen and to find out that it had been driven by her daughter, Sophia, who had been reported missing the previous day. The family was baffled as to how Sophia's car ended up abandoned in a desert in a neighboring state and where she might be. Maria emphasized that her daughter cherished her car and would never have left it behind, suggesting that something terrible must have happened. One theory was that the vehicle had been hijacked and that Sophia might have been harmed, but there was still hope that she could be found alive. However, with no leads in sight, law enforcement was unsure where to begin their search. On Sunday, March 12th, a group of teenagers walking near the outskirts of El Paso spotted something shiny in the desert and decided to investigate. As they got closer, they found the lifeless body of a young woman in a red evening dress. They hurried home to tell their parents, who called the police. Forensic investigators arrived at the scene within an hour. Officers discovered the young woman lying on her back, her face so disfigured that she was unidentifiable. Her dress was soaked in blood and covered with sand. Although no identification was found, Police believed they had discovered the body of a girl named Sophia, who had been reported missing 2 days earlier. When Sophia's family was informed that a body had been found in the desert, her mother, Maria, refused to accept it, convinced that there had been a mistake and that her daughter was still alive. Her doubts disappeared when detectives showed her a photograph taken from the victim's bra. The picture showed Sophia holding her youngest brother, which confirmed her identity, as it was known that Sophia often carried photos of her siblings in her wallet. In her final moments, she had placed one close to her heart. The autopsy revealed that she had died from multiple gunshot wounds to the head, having been shot 5 times in the face. One bullet traveled through her head and was later found in the sand at the crime scene. The severity of her injuries left her with no chance of survival. Additionally, there were clear signs of a struggle, including severe bruising and indications of physical violence. The inner surfaces of her thighs were bruised and scratched, and forensic examinations confirmed internal injuries consistent with an assault. DNA analysis also provided biological evidence, and defensive wounds on her hands indicated that she had fought fiercely for her life but ultimately was overpowered. None of Sophia's personal belongings were found, except for a photograph she had hidden in her clothing. Due to the severity of her injuries, her identity could only be confirmed through DNA testing, as even dental records proved ineffective. Toxicology reports later revealed that there were no substances in her system at the time of death. Investigators discovered several shoe prints near the body. While most were unclear, one distinct impression helped forensic analysts identify the size and tread pattern of the sole. Authorities found only Sophia's fingerprints inside her car. Although her purse was recovered from the vehicle, the perpetrator had taken her license, keys, and cash. Her family was advised to change their locks and install a security system because the killer had access to her home address from her ID and had her keys. Her family followed these recommendations but lived in constant fear that the person responsible for her death might target someone else. DNA samples from the biological evidence left by the attacker were uploaded into the National Criminal Database, but no matches were found. This indicated that the suspect likely had no prior criminal record, complicating the investigation. Authorities also considered the possibility that the suspect was a transient who had crossed illegally from Mexico, committed the crime, and then fled back, making him even harder to track. A crucial lead emerged when investigators learned that Sophia had gone on a blind date the night she disappeared, arranged by a coworker. They sought to question both men involved. Since her family did not have their contact information, officers visited her workplace at the mall. Justin, the coworker who set up the date, was on shift that day and agreed to go to the station for questioning. The second man, Marcus, was also interviewed. During the interview, Justin explained that he had planned to meet Sophia at the club, but she never arrived. He and Marcus waited for her until around midnight before they left. He only learned that Sophia was missing the next day when she didn't show up for work. Both Justin and Marcus took polygraph tests to verify their statements, provided DNA samples, and turned over the shoes they wore that night. The results showed no connection to the crime, and their alibis were strong, as many people had seen them at the club. During a closer examination of Sophia's car, officers discovered a crumpled ATM receipt that had slipped under the driver's seat. The receipt indicated that at 10:23 p.m., she had withdrawn $20 from an ATM located just a few blocks from her residence. This detail became a crucial lead, as the ATM and nearby buildings had surveillance cameras. Investigators reviewed the footage from all available cameras and were shocked by what they found. The crime had been recorded from multiple angles, which helped them understand the sequence of events. At 10:22 p.m., a red Pontiac arrived at the ATM. The driver's side window was rolled down, and a young woman was seen withdrawing $20 from her account. The footage clearly showed that she was alone in the car. After taking the cash, Sophia paused for a moment to apply lipstick using her compact mirror. At that point, a figure dressed entirely in black, with a hood obscuring his face, crept up behind her car. She did not see him until he reached her window. Without warning, he pulled out a gun and attacked her in the head. His intention was not to kill her but to intimidate. The bullet grazed her cheek, clipped her nose, and exited from the passenger side window. Shortly afterward, despite her injury and holding a tissue to her bleeding face, Sophia withdrew another $200 from her account. The car then began to drive away from the ATM with the assailant now inside, holding a gun to the back of her head. Within seconds, the vehicle was out of view of the camera, and what happened next is unknown. It's essential to note that this took place in the early 2000s, a time when surveillance camera quality was not very advanced. The footage was grainy and lacked detail, making it impossible to produce a composite sketch of the suspect. All that could be discerned was that the attacker was a white male of average height with a slim build, possibly sporting facial hair. This information, along with video clips of the attack, was shared on local television to alert residents of the danger and encourage anyone who recognized the suspect to come forward. The investigation was lengthy and frustrating. After a news segment aired, police received numerous calls, but none of them provided useful information. As time passed, the investigation slowed, no new evidence surfaced, leaving authorities with more questions than answers. At the end of March, a man contacted the police, stating that he had found a driver's license near the spot where Sophia's body had been discovered 2 weeks earlier. The license belonged to a local woman, raising concerns that she might also have been a victim. However, when the police reached out to her, they learned she was safe and had not been harmed. She explained that her purse had been stolen earlier that month at a mall, where Sophia had also worked. Investigators believed the suspect could have been stalking potential victims and shared this warning with the media to alert other women. The very next day, a young man came forward, admitting to stealing the purse. He panicked after seeing the news and worried that police might link him to a crime he hadn't committed. He willingly provided a DNA sample and was cleared as a suspect in Sophia's case. By July 2000, the investigation had hit a dead end. To help generate new leads, authorities announced a $10,000 reward for information leading to the capture of the killer. Shortly after, Sophia's family launched a fundraising campaign to increase the reward amount, garnering support from friends, concerned citizens, and local organizations. By August, the reward for information had risen to $55,000. However, 6 months had passed since the tragedy, and no new leads had surfaced. Then, on September 30th, 2000, a young woman named Heather Napa called the police, claiming she knew who was responsible for Sophia's death and wanted to share information in exchange for the reward money. Although there had been many false tips before, Heather claimed to have physical evidence. Heather, a 20-year-old mother of 2, alleged that her boyfriend, Michael Jacques, and their friend, William Berkeley, were involved in the crime. To support her claims, she provided a charred driver's license that belonged to Sofia Martinez. She explained that she had been afraid to come forward sooner due to fear of retaliation, but with Michael recently jailed and having no means to support her children, she decided to speak up for both the investigation and the reward. At that time, Heather was hospitalized for kidney issues, while Michael and William were both unemployed and struggling financially. On March 10th, William visited her in the hospital and pulled Michael aside for a private conversation. Heather overheard parts of their discussion and realized they were planning something illegal, which she assumed was related to their previous dealings with banned substances. She didn't probe for further details. Shortly afterward, they left, taking a box of latex gloves from a medical supply cabinet. Later that night, around 11 p.m., Michael returned to Heather's hospital room and claimed they had obtained some money. He said he had hidden near an ATM and signaled to William when a single driver approached. After the driver withdrew cash, William allegedly threatened her with a gun, took the money, and ordered her to get out of the car before driving away. Detectives were aware that this account did not match the actual crime, but they allowed Heather to continue. After midnight, a nurse informed Michael that William was waiting for him downstairs. They then left in separate cars, drove to a neighboring state, abandoned the Pontiac in the desert, and returned home in Michael's car. The next day, Heather was released from the hospital and felt anxious about whether the victim would report the crime. To reassure her, William showed her Sophia's driver's license, which noted down Sophia's home address. He casually mentioned that they could intimidate the victim into silence if necessary. Then, without hesitation, He threw the license into a smoldering grill and watched it melt before going to bed. A few days later, Heather watched a news report about Sophia's case and had a realization. She recognized William from the ATM surveillance footage and understood why he had altered his appearance by shaving off his beard and head. When she asked Michael about his involvement, he told her to keep quiet. Heather retrieved the burned license plate from the grill and hid it. She also noticed that Michael had a set of car keys with a Pontiac keychain, although she was unsure of what had happened to them. In August, William left home, and in September, Michael was arrested for distributing banned substances. By that time, feeling safer, Heather decided to come forward and find a way to earn money by providing information to the police. After Heather's statement, investigators brought in 23-year-old Michael Jacques for questioning. Surprisingly, he acknowledged his involvement and agreed to tell his version of events. He claimed that he had nothing to do with Sophia's death but admitted that he helped William cover it up. Michael explained that he and William were in desperate need of money and planned to rob someone at an ATM. When they saw a young girl in a red Pontiac at the ATM, Michael wanted to call off the robbery. However, William misunderstood his actions as a signal to proceed. Although Michael knew William had a gun, he never thought it would be used. The situation quickly escalated, and before Michael realized what was happening, the car sped away. He waited for about 30 minutes, but when William didn't return, he went back to the hospital to be with Heather. Michael insisted that he didn't know what happened to Sophia afterward and denied any knowledge of the assault or murder. However, he confessed to helping dispose of the car. He later learned more information but chose not to report William, aware that he too would face repercussions. A key piece of evidence, a set of car keys, was later found on the roof of Michael's house, exactly where he had thrown them. William Berkeley, the main suspect in the case, was arrested at his parents' home in early October. At just 20 years old, he had no criminal record, but those who knew him reported a pattern of aggression and cruelty dating back to his school years. He had previously assaulted classmates, former girlfriends, and even his mother, yet none of them had reported these incidents to the police. Despite this violent history, William was a talented artist whose work had been showcased in galleries. During his first interrogation, he admitted to robbing and killing Sophia, claiming he needed the money, but he avoided specifics. He insisted that their encounter was consensual and stated that the shooting was accidental. As interrogations progressed and he understood the seriousness of the accusations, he changed his narrative. He began to portray himself as a victim, claiming he was part of a plan led by Michael. Williams said that Michael had selected the car, believing the owner of a Pontiac would have substantial funds. Unfortunately for them, Sophia only had $220, which they viewed as the price for her life. In the lead-up to the trial, William and Michael tried to shift the blame onto each other, but the evidence presented against William was compelling. Authorities found the murder weapon, a handgun, at his home. His DNA was found on Sophia, and a pair of sneakers matching the footprints at the crime scene were found in his bedroom. On April 7, 2002, William was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to death by lethal injection, which was carried out in the spring of 2010. Throughout the years before his execution, he showed no remorse for his actions. Michael Jacques was also found guilty on November 3, 2002, of conspiracy and evidence tampering, receiving a life sentence with the chance of parole after 40 years. Heather, who had been promised a $55,000 reward, received the money but found no joy in it. She lost custody of her children and, at the age of 35, died from complications related to a chronic kidney condition. The case of Mackenzie Sharilla. Mackenzie Sharilla was born in August 2004 in Strongsville, Ohio, the third of 3 children. Her parents, John Schilla and Natalie Stevens, made a conscious effort to raise their children with love, care, and a good education, always encouraging their endeavors. As the youngest daughter, Mackenzie was often spoiled and got away with many mischievous acts, including serious offenses, due to her parents' leniency. As she grew up, Mackenzie became a demanding and selfish individual. She was accustomed to getting her way and believed she was above consequences, no matter her actions. Classmates and teachers observed that Mackenzie was a pleasant and open child in her early years, but as she aged, her behavior and character began to deteriorate. She would throw tantrums when things didn't go her way, lost her temper easily, was impudent and impatient, used foul language, and was even known to get into physical altercations. Mackenzie refused to consider anyone else's opinions, always believing her own view to be the only one that mattered, and prioritized her own interests above all else. In her teenage years, Mackenzie's behavior became increasingly unbearable, but her parents turned a blind eye, attributing it to adolescence and believing that she needed understanding and patience. However, her defiant nature was only the tip of the iceberg. She developed a drinking problem in high school and occasionally dabbled in illegal substances, often getting away with it. Her reckless actions posed a direct threat not only to herself, but also to those around her. Despite this, her parents either failed to notice or chose to ignore the obvious issue. Like many of her peers, Mackenzie was obsessed with social media, rarely putting her phone down. She frequently posted provocative photos of herself smoking or drinking on her account, accompanied by equally provocative comments. Her friends were similar, and together they engaged in vandalism, organized fights, and occasionally stole from others, even catching the attention of the police on several occasions. However, they were merely given warnings and educational talks, which reinforced their belief that they were above the law. Dominic Russo, born in September 2001, was the fourth of 7 children to Frank and Christine Russo in Strongsville. Growing up in a close-knit family with 3 brothers and 3 sisters, Dominic received ample love, attention, and care despite being part of a large family. He excelled academically, actively participated in sports from a young age, and maintained a healthy lifestyle. His parents, Frank and Christine, struck a balance between being moderately strict and encouraging their children's overall development. As a result, Dominic was popular among his peers, often drew attention, and was known for his bright and attractive appearance. Focusing on meaningful connections, Dominic avoided casual relationships. After high school, he enrolled in a local university to pursue a degree in performing arts production, aiming to make a name for himself in the music industry. Dominic was a talented young man who wrote and performed his own songs. By the age of 20, Dominic had achieved significant milestones, establishing his own small business, buying a car, and renting a spacious apartment in a desirable neighborhood. He continued to excel in sports and was regarded as one of the top students at the university. Dominic and Mackenzie first met at a party surrounded by mutual friends when she was in her graduating class. This chance encounter proved to be a pivotal moment in their lives. As total opposites, they were instinctively attracted to each other. Dominic, a handsome young man with curly hair and a passion for music, immediately caught Mackenzie's attention. Unlike the guys she usually hung out with, he was educated, well-mannered, and interesting, able to converse on various topics. Mackenzie, a stunning woman with a slim figure and impeccable style, knew how to make a lasting impression. She turned on her charm to grab Dominic's attention, which she quickly achieved. The two started dating in the fall of 2021 and soon introduced each other to their parents. While Mackenzie's parents were thrilled with her choice and thought Dominic was perfect for their daughter, Dominic's parents, Frank and Christine Russo, had mixed feelings about Mackenzie. On the surface, she appeared sweet and innocent, trying to impress them, but something about her raised their suspicions. Mackenzie's friends and family believed she had genuinely fallen in love for the first time and hoped her relationship with Dominic would positively impact her character and behavior. At the time, no one could have predicted the tragic outcome of this romance. They quickly became inseparable, regularly holding hands and openly showing their affection in public. As a result, it didn't take long for the news of their relationship to spread throughout the small town. While those closest to Mackenzie felt sympathy for her boyfriend, most people were genuinely happy for they. However, Dominic soon realized that something was off. He began to notice strange behaviors in Mackenzie, such as her frequent outbursts of defiance and her insistence on getting her way in all interactions. At first, he didn't give it much thought, attributing it to her young age and desire for attention. They started making plans for their future together, including discussing marriage once Mackenzie turned 18. They also planned to leave their hometown and move to a major city, ideally New York, where Dominic could pursue a successful music career. As time went on, Mackenzie's behavior grew more and more unsettling, sometimes even scaring Dominic. She demanded that her boyfriend give in to her every demand, and when he refused, she would throw tantrums, acting like a spoiled kid. At first, Dominic tried to brush off her outbursts as a joke, but soon realized that this was the real personality of the woman he was dating. While she was able to keep up a good front in public, when they were alone, she would let loose a flood of emotions and even get physically violent. Mackenzie's behavior became increasingly aggressive, leading the young man to decide he'd had enough. He suggested they take a break to allow her to sort out her feelings, but this triggered a public outburst in front of their mutual friends. Mackenzie screamed, threatened to kill him if he left, and vowed to burn down his house and wreck his car. However, this dramatic display only reinforced his conviction that ending their toxic relationship was the right decision. Despite this, Mackenzie was determined to hold on to her boyfriend. She continued to call him, inviting him to parties and posting photos of them on social media with declarations of love. When Dominic made it clear that everything was over, she flew into a rage. Mackenzie began showing up at his house almost daily, yelling insults and threats under his windows. She called him from different numbers, left messages on his answering machine, and sent emails and social media posts. One moment, she'd swear her love and offer to start anew. The next, she'd descend into insults and threats once again. Dominic was utterly bewildered by Mackenzie's behavior, which he had never experienced before. He attempted to engage in conversation with her, ignoring her, and even recording her aggressive outbursts on his phone. However, Mackenzie's conduct escalated to the point where she would publicly confront Dominic, screaming and insulting him in front of bystanders. This turned his life into a living hell, but he still held on to the hope that with time, she would lose interest and move on to someone else. One day, in the presence of witnesses, Mackenzie brazenly declared that killing Dominic would be easier than letting him go. She threatened that if he didn't return to her, no one else would have him, and she would take care of it. Although Dominic didn't take her threats seriously, those around him recognized that Mackenzie was dead serious. The schoolgirl frequently issuing menace included promises to physically assault him, run him over with a car, kidnap him and drive off a cliff, or stop the car on train tracks in front of an oncoming train. Each sinister scenario was described in vivid detail, as if Mackenzie had meticulously planned it and was waiting for the perfect moment to execute it. Mackenzie realized that threatening and insulting Dominic wasn't getting him back, but rather pushing him away. So she changed her approach. She became sweet and charming once more, stopped pressuring and harassing him, and pretended to have learned from her mistakes, wanting to improve herself for the better. She brought up the upcoming university enrollment, asking for his help in choosing a university, and even claimed to be worried about her final exams. Dominic was pleasantly surprised by these changes and, despite everything, still had feelings for his former girlfriend. He decided to help her with enrollment, simply out of kindness. As a result, they started seeing each other and communicating again. They grew closer over time. Dominic began inviting Mackenzie on dates and sought to spend all his free time with her, believing she had changed, matured, and become more responsible. Without realizing it, he fell in love with her again, and all past grievances were forgotten. This time, however, they didn't rush to announce their reunion to friends and acquaintances. Their meetings were more like secret dates, where they simply enjoyed each other's company, avoiding the scrutiny of others. When Dominic's brother Angelo found out what was going on, he warned they that their relationship would not end well. But Dominic, being deeply in love, ignored his brother's caution. Meanwhile, Mackenzie, who was obsessed with Dominic, devised a terrifying plan to take revenge on him. She began to fantasize about a high-speed car crash and spent hours driving around the city to find the perfect spot to put her plan into action. Since there were no steep cliffs nearby, she considered targeting a train on the tracks, but eventually decided it was too unreliable. One day, Mackenzie drove into a secluded industrial area with no cameras and very few cars. There, she spotted a massive brick wall, which sparked a new, equally horrific plan in her mind. She decided that if she drove at maximum speed and crashed into the wall, it would be just as sensational as plunging off a cliff. Initially, Mackenzie intended to die alongside Dominic, hoping their tragic story would be told and retold by everyone in the city. She even confided in her best friend, but her friend didn't take her seriously, thinking it was just another empty threat. Mackenzie had made similar claims before, but never followed through. In late July 2022, Mackenzie suggested to her boyfriend Dominic that they attend an upcoming party hosted by their mutual friends, just a week shy of her 18th birthday. The party would be a perfect opportunity for them to have fun, unwind, and publicly showcase their rekindled romance. Dominic agreed, still trusting Mackenzie's sincerity and intentions. The party took place on Saturday, July 30th. Mackenzie and Dominic arrived hand in hand, immediately drawing attention from the other guests. They looked happy, smiled, and openly displayed their affection for each other. Their friends were genuinely delighted with their reunion, noting that they made a lovely and harmonious couple. Throughout the evening and night, the young pair had a blast, happily took photos, and unhesitatingly kissed in front of everyone. Little did anyone know, this joyful celebration would soon turn into a devastating tragedy. Like the other partygoers, they had a few drinks, but Mackenzie secretly took an illegal drug to boost her courage and avoid getting cold feet. The next morning, Mackenzie and Dominic bid farewell to their friends and headed to their car, but Dominic's friend Dave requested a ride home. Mackenzie initially objected, citing their own plans, but Dominic saw no issue with giving his friend a lift, not wanting to arouse suspicion or alter their plans. Mackenzie reluctantly agreed, despite her reservations about the change in plans. Mackenzie got behind the wheel, her boyfriend sat in the passenger seat, and her friend sat behind him. With a slow and quiet start, the car pulled away from the party venue and headed onto Main Street. Mackenzie drove cautiously, keeping to the speed limit and avoiding drawing attention to herself. At a stoplight, she came to a halt, even though the road was empty. As her passengers dozed off, Mackenzie reconsidered her plan. She would later claim that she wanted to die in the accident. But this seems unlikely since she had fastened her seatbelt during the last stop, while her passengers remained unbuckled. When the light turned green, she accelerated quickly, taking a sharp turn onto a poorly lit secondary road that led into an industrial area. The guys were caught off guard, seemingly unaware of what was happening. The car sped up to its top speed, but Mackenzie continued to floor it, steering the vehicle straight into a blank brick wall. The crash occurred in the deserted industrial area early Sunday morning, with no witnesses or Good Samaritans to help. However, a woman living on the outskirts, near the accident site, heard the impact and went outside to investigate. She saw smoke and upon closer inspection, realized that a car had crashed. After the accident, she rushed back inside to call emergency services. About half an hour later, medics arrived at the scene, but unfortunately, the two men in the car had died instantly. The girl driving the car, however, was still alive, thanks to her seatbelt and airbags. Mackenzie was unconscious, with her legs trapped in the wreckage, but she was breathing and had a palpable pulse, giving hope that she would survive. During the rescue process, she occasionally opened her eyes, but seemed unaware of her surroundings. Mackenzie was rushed to the hospital, where doctors diagnosed her with multiple fractures and internal organ damage. Blood tests revealed that she had been under the influence of both alcohol and drugs at the time of the accident. Ironically, the doctor believed that this may have helped prevent her from dying from shock while waiting for help to arrive. The police investigation initially suggested that Mackenzie, while under the influence, might not have realized what she was doing, and perhaps tried to drive through the wall or didn't see any obstacles. This theory was supported by the lack of braking distance. However, Mackenzie was unable to provide further insight as she was unconscious in the intensive care unit following a complex operation. Mackenzie regained consciousness and, overcome with emotion, confessed to the doctor on duty. She explained that she had intentionally driven into the wall at high speed, intending to kill her boyfriend and die with him. She clarified that Davin was an unintended victim, only in the car because of his own obsession, having asked to accompany them. Investigations revealed a different story. Surveillance footage tracked the initial part of the car's route, showing Mackenzie driving cautiously and following traffic rules, until she suddenly turned onto a road leading to an industrial area. Moreover, evidence emerged that Mackenzie had driven the entire route in both directions several days prior, with her car spotted by at least a dozen witnesses at various times. After leaving the hospital, Mackenzie bounced back quickly and resumed her carefree life. She socialized with friends, made future plans, and even attended a concert in a wheelchair, posting selfies on social media. By Halloween, she was back on her feet and dressed in costume, living life to the fullest. Mackenzie was arrested on November 4th, 2022. The investigation took just over 3 months to gather evidence and build a case against her. She was charged with premeditated aggravated double murder and possession of a controlled substance, which was found in her pocket and detected in her blood. During the trial, Mackenzie changed her story multiple times. Initially, she claimed to have suffered a memory lapse, but after a friend testified against her, revealing her plan, Mackenzie shifted her defense, stating she wanted to die with her lover. However, this new claim was quickly disputed, as evidence showed she had worn a seatbelt. On August 21, 2023, the jury found Mackenzie guilty on all charges. Although she was convicted, the court took into account that she was not yet 18 years old at the time of the crime, only 5 days shy of her 18th birthday. As a minor under state law, she was eligible for a more lenient sentence. Mackenzie faced 2 consecutive 15-year sentences without parole for each murder. However, due to her youth, her sentences were allowed to run concurrently, making her eligible for parole in 15 years. At the time of her potential release, Mackenzie will be 33 years old. The court's decision left both sides dissatisfied. The families of the deceased youths announced their intention to appeal for a harsher punishment, while Mackenzie's lawyer felt the sentence was too severe and also appealed. Despite this, the judge refused to modify the sentence, stating that he doubted Cheryl would be released from prison after 15 years. In his view, the defendant had failed to show remorse for her crime, displaying arrogance and even contempt towards the court, and now had ample time to reflect on her heinous act. The case of Valeria Vivano. Valeria Fernandez Vivano was born on May 29, 1996 in Laguna, a small commune near Santiago, Chile's capital city. She was the youngest of 3 children born to Miguel and Jacqueline Vivano. Valeria grew up with her older biological siblings, Michelangelo and Daniela. Her father worked for a transportation company, while her mother was a dedicated homemaker who focused on raising their children and creating a warm home environment. When Valeria started school, her parents decided to separate, which was a huge shock to her. Although they continued to communicate after the divorce, and her father remained involved in their lives, providing financial support, Valeria harbored resentment towards him. They would occasionally argue, sometimes not speaking for months, but they always reconciled. After the divorce, Miguel Vivano remarried and had 2 more children, becoming Valeria's half-siblings. Despite this, Valeria, Daniela, and Michelangelo maintained warm relationships with them. Jacqueline, on the other hand, never remarried, focusing on raising her children and later caring for her grandchildren from her older children. Valeria showed a strong-willed character, determination, and perseverance from a young age. She excelled academically, participated in sports, and demonstrated courage and a strong sense of justice, often putting others' needs before her own. Valeria's desire to help those around her, protect the vulnerable, and fight for justice likely inspired her to pursue a career in law enforcement. After graduating from high school, Valeria enrolled in the police academy in Santiago, where she graduated with honors in 2016 at the age of 20. The following year, she joined the Chilean police force and began working in the capital's serious crimes unit. From the start of her career, Valeria demonstrated herself to be a dedicated and passionate law enforcement officer, driven by a strong sense of justice. She was deeply committed to her job, performing her duties with diligence and always ready to respond to any situation at a moment's notice. Whether it meant leaving in the middle of the night to investigate a crime scene, pursuing suspects at personal risk, or providing emotional support to those who had lost loved ones, Valeria was always willing to go the extra mile. Her colleagues praised her as kind, cheerful, and friendly, yet she remained a consummate professional and trustworthy partner. Over nearly 5.5 years of service, Valeria received numerous accolades and awards, rapidly advancing in her career and earning the respect of her peers and the admiration of her superiors. A highlight of her career was representing her department in Spain, where she spent 2 weeks in Madrid on an official visit, an experience that filled her with immense pride. By 2020, she had risen to the rank of assistant inspector. A 21-year-old rookie cop, Lionel Alejandro Contreras Canales, joined the precinct where Valeria worked, fresh from the police academy. Valeria took him under her wing, becoming his mentor in his first job. A few months into their partnership, they got along fairly well. Not much is known about Lionel's upbringing, but it's believed he came from a wealthy and influential family with a high-ranking official as an uncle, which gave him a life of comfort and luxury. As a result, Lionel was self-absorbed, expecting everything to go his way. Valeria soon caught Lionel's attention, and he made several attempts to win her over, asking her out on dates, but she rejected him each time. Valeria was dedicated to her job and saw workplace romances as unprofessional. She was also strict with Lionel, viewing him as immature. Although Lionel was only 3 years younger, Valeria found his behavior childish and hoped to help him grow up. On May 29, 2021, Valeria turned 25. She celebrated her birthday at her mother's house, surrounded by many guests, including relatives, friends, and work colleagues. However, Lionel was not invited. Valeria intentionally left him out to avoid any potential awkwardness, as he had recently tried to rekindle their romance. When she talked to him about it, he only reaffirmed his feelings for her, which she wanted to keep private from their colleagues. Valeria looked upset despite the festivities. She was trying to conceal her sadness with a fake smile. The recent quarrel with her father had caused days of silence between them, and she had hoped he would put their differences aside and come to her party, giving them a chance to make up. But all he did was send a congratulatory message without even bothering to phone her. Jacqueline, Valeria's mother, noticed her daughter's distress and knew that the rift with her father was the cause of her sadness. Angry at her ex-husband's actions, she was convinced that Miguel would eventually reach out to Valeria and they would talk things through and reconcile. Tragically, Valeria and her father never got the chance to resolve their issues. 2 weeks later, she lost her life in a fatal shooting while on duty on June 13, 2021. Valeria was participating in street patrols and vehicle checks that night, searching for suspects related to a crime that had occurred the previous day in a suburb of the capital. The police had issued an alert for a white Kia Chato, believed to be driven by a suspected criminal who was likely armed and possibly accompanied by others in the car. Valeria was riding in a patrol car with her partner Lionel, driven by Deputy Commissioner Felipe Gilardo. They spotted the suspect's vehicle and immediately gave chase, without waiting for backup. The officers successfully intercepted and blocked the suspect's escape. Canales and Vivano jumped out of their vehicle, guns drawn, and yelled for the offenders to surrender and exit their car with their hands raised. Just then, a single shot rang out, and in the ensuing chaos, Valeria clutched her side and fell to the asphalt beside the police car. Reinforcements arrived simultaneously, and her colleagues heard the shot and saw that she was wounded, but they couldn't fully comprehend what had happened or who had fired. The criminals took advantage of the momentary confusion, sped away, and escaped the scene. Despite the swift arrival of medics and her colleagues' efforts to stop the bleeding, Valeria's life couldn't be saved. She was rushed to the nearest hospital, where top specialists fought to save her life for several hours. Unfortunately, due to severe blood loss and damage to vital organs, Valeria passed away on the operating table, never regaining consciousness. Valeria's family rushed to the hospital after hearing the news, but they were too late. Miguel, her dad, was overwhelmed with grief and regret, haunted by their recent petty argument. His guilt was so intense, it put his own health at risk. Valeria died in the line of duty during an operation to catch dangerous criminals, hailed as a hero for giving her life to ensure others' peace and safety. Local media extensively covered the story, praising her courage and selflessness. The public was shocked and captivated by the arrests, and soon the suspects were identified as 19-year-old Miguel Alejandro Cupin and his 17-year-old accomplice, whose name was not released due to his age. Both had previous convictions for minor crimes. In response to the arrests, Chile's president, Miguel Juan Sebastián Pinera, issued an official statement promising that those responsible would face the full extent of the law. As the investigation progressed, some facts didn't add up. Valeria's body was returned to her family after the autopsy and buried in a capital city cemetery, with hundreds attending the funeral. Her parents described the experience as a terrible nightmare. Notably, among those who carried Valeria's coffin was her colleague Lionel, who seemed more grief-stricken than anyone else. However, other colleagues reported that there had been recent tension between Valeria and Lionel, to the extent that Valeria didn't even invite him to her birthday celebration. Legal proceedings started right after the funeral against those arrested the next day. Initially, everyone thought the guilty ones were caught and proving it would be easy. But it soon became clear the investigation was flawed, with key details missed and evidence ignored. A month and a half after the officer's death, 2 employees were suspended for their alleged role in the incident. Valeria's parents were called to the prosecutor's office, expecting new evidence. Instead, they were devastated to learn from prosecutor Juan Carlos Carrasco that their daughter died from a bullet fired by her colleague. Subsequent investigations showed that the fatal shot was fired from a service weapon held by one of Valeria's co-workers. A same-day ballistics test confirmed this, but the results were tampered with, and the bullet's characteristics, shape, caliber, and weight were incorrectly recorded in the evidence locker. Furthermore, the bullet had passed through Valeria's body, but it wasn't extracted. Instead, it was reported to have been extracted, and the entry and exit wounds in the forensic reports were switched. The shot was fired into her back, not her abdomen. Furthermore, the detainees who were on trial, claiming to have confessed to their involvement and were on the verge of imprisonment, began filing complaints. They alleged that their confessions were obtained through torture and threats, and the pistol they had with them that evening was not even loaded. Moreover, their involvement in the prior crime that prompted the interception plan that fateful night remained unconfirmed. A surprising twist emerged in the public's perception of Vivano, transforming her from a tragic hero who died in the line of duty to an innocent victim betrayed by her own colleagues. As a result, the main suspect shifted to Felipe Gilardo Ara, who was driving the police car, and Lionel Alejandro Contas Canales, Vivano's partner, who was seated in the back. Both were immediately suspended from duty. On August 5th, it was discovered that the fatal bullet came from a police-issued weapon. A document surfaced showing examination results that implicated Lionel as the prime suspect, as he was the only one with gunshot residue on his hands. A crucial finding that had been mysteriously left out of previous reports. Additionally, several other vital documents, including ballistics examination reports and the pathologist's conclusions, were improperly stored in an archive box that had not been thoroughly reviewed. It remains unclear whether this was an accident, an oversight, or a deliberate attempt to conceal crucial evidence. The police officers involved in the operation to catch the criminals surprisingly became suspects in the murder of their fellow officer. Along with the suspects already arrested, they participated in a reenactment of the events of that night to clarify what had happened. In the reenactment, Philippe, who was driving, explained that he could only see Valeria, who was sitting next to him in the front passenger seat, when she got out of the car. Lionel, who was sitting behind them, also exited the vehicle, but Philippe couldn't see what he was doing. According to Philippe, Valeria took just a few steps before a shot was fired, causing her to fall to the ground. At that point, Lionel rushed to help the injured woman and provide first aid to try to save her life. Lionel gave a different account of what happened, saying that he and his partner Valeria got out of the patrol car at almost the same time, but she rushed forward immediately after the shot was fired. He denied shooting his colleague, Valeria, and claimed that Philippe, the driver, should have seen him trying to help Valeria and confirmed this. According to Lionel, he was the first to assist Valeria and tried to stop her bleeding to prevent her from dying. The investigation managed to reconstruct the events, despite inconsistencies in the witnesses' statements. They found that Canales was behind his partner when the shot was fired, which corresponded with the bullet's trajectory. Furthermore, he was the only one with traces of gunshot residue on his hands. Lionel was arrested as prime suspect after secret reports and test results were released, while other detainees were freed on condition they stay local, lacking evidence to implicate them. But the officers' motives remained unclear. The prevailing theory is that a tragic accident occurred when an inexperienced young officer unintentionally fired his weapon while standing behind his partner. In a state of panic, he attempted to assist her. Later, when submitting his service weapon, he falsely claimed not to have fired it. However, the truth eventually came to light, exposing that influential relatives of the young officer exploited their power, wealth, and connections to conceal the incident, leading to fabricated reports, missing documents, contradictory evidence, and coerced testimony from detained individuals. Despite Canales' arrest, suspicions about Philippe's involvement persisted. Philippe was also armed with the same service weapons, was present at the scene, and could have accidentally fired the fatal shot. Additionally, Philippe had a history of using his weapon unjustifiably during an arrest, although no one was harmed on that occasion. The defense team, hired by Lionel's relatives, presented a theory that Philippe might have accidentally shot his colleague due to the identical service weapons, which could have been mixed up or intentionally swapped. Philippe's own testimony was inconsistent, and he claimed he couldn't accurately describe the events that took place. Despite this, the lack of gunpowder residue on the driver's hands suggested his innocence. Philippe's explanation that the residue came from when he was compressing the victim's wound was not believable, given that Valeria's blood stains remained on his hands. The investigation was widely criticized, and the victim's parents were left feeling desperate, leading to public outrage and a loss of trust in law enforcement. Following further investigation, Lionel remained the sole suspect. Lionel was ultimately found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 12 years in prison. However, in a surprise move, the Supreme Court later overturned the sentence, reducing his imprisonment to just 540 days. Valeria's family is now planning to sue the Chilean state, accusing the judges of corruption. Is it possible to distort a sober mind so much that a person would take up arms and go on a killing spree? Today's story shows that it is indeed possible. It is hard to find a more merciless and senseless attack. Morgan Metzer and her husband, Rodney Metzer, were inseparable, as often joked by their friends, family. They met when she was 14 and he was 17. From the moment they met, it was love at first sight. What followed was a tender, loving relationship that continued to develop until they decided to tie the knot in 2009. Morgan was just 21 years old at the time. After their wedding, they went on a honeymoon, and upon returning, both continued to build their lives, strengthen their love. However, not everything went as smoothly as they had hoped. Less than a year into their marriage, Rodney suffered his first major loss. His younger brother Kevin, who had just turned 19, died of leukemia. According to Morgan, her husband changed after that, becoming harsher and more rude. She believed that this behavior would gradually pass and that her husband would return to normal. But even after years, he did not change and instead became increasingly cruel. Rodney began to cling to her for any reason, was very demanding, and did not tolerate criticism. Despite this, Morgan remembered the beginning of their life together fondly and did not want to leave her husband, hoping that everything would work out. On March 15, 2011, they had their first child, a boy named Kevin in honor of Rodney's deceased brother. Morgan and Rodney believed that this baby would allow them to restore their relationship and make Rodney more gentle. However, Kevin was born 2 weeks prematurely with a congenital heart defect. The child lived only 18 days before passing away, never having been discharged from the hospital. This tragedy hit the young father even harder and, of course, traumatized Morgan. She later described that moment as one in which she felt as if she had fallen out of reality, so much so that she could barely remember that period. Despite the tragedy, the Metzer coped. 3 months after losing their first child, they learned that Morgan was pregnant again, this time with twins. They welcomed this second chance to become parents and hoped that things would turn out differently this time. The children were born in 2012 and were healthy. However, contrary to expectations, the tension between the spouses only grew. Morgan often communicated with her loved ones and described her relationships with them during this period as psychological abuse. For the first time, she suspected that she had been living in a delusion all these years. She began to realize that her husband was a manipulative person who cruelly controlled her. Looking back, she recognized that Rodney had always been like this. It just took time and significant trauma for his true behavior to manifest fully. Many believe that Morgan had fallen into the trap of a manipulator because of her lack of life experience. She had been with him since she was 14 and had never been in another relationship. In fact, she did not know that it could be different. The situation only worsened when Rodney lost his job. Morgan was on maternity leave and caring for the twins, which meant she could not earn money. Their financial situation became difficult. Rodney soon had to take on 2 jobs to provide for their large family. He became very tired, which only made him angrier. Morgan decided to take action. When the children grew a little, she took matters into her own hands and opened a small interior design business. Contrary to her husband's expectations, Morgan was successful. She began to earn good money. Against the backdrop of her relatives' depressed state, she even became the primary breadwinner in the household. She hired her best friend to work with her. The first confirmation of Morgan's success came in 2020 when she received an award in her hometown for the best interior design. Rodney did not support her during this time. On the contrary, he felt like a failure compared to his more successful wife. He became more jealous and angry. He escalated from psychological violence to physical abuse. This happened for the first time during one of their joint weekends when they went boating together. They had an argument on the water, and when they returned home, Rodney hit his wife several times. This was a shocking moment for Morgan, as Rodney had always spoken out against physical violence and positioned himself as a fighter for women's rights. He had always presented himself as a kind and sensitive person, even refusing to watch films that depicted cruelty to women. His punch was the breaking point. Morgan now realized with horror who she had spent most of her life with. That night, she called her father and asked him to pick her up from their lake house. When her father arrived, Rodney denied hitting her. He then fully demonstrated his manipulative nature, somehow convincing all of Morgan's friends that she had given herself a couple of bruises to make him look bad. According to him, during an argument, she would hit herself, leaving marks on her own face. He claimed that any bruises on her resulted from his attempts to stop her crazy behavior for her own good. The manipulator went further. He had been communicating with his wife for a long time and even managed to convince her that she was partly to blame for what had happened. From that moment on, Rodney began to use this tactic constantly. He influenced her and set his wife up so that she gradually began to believe that the problems and quarrels in their family were her fault. He even blamed her for his career problems. At this point, the violence against Morgan only intensified. In addition to the psychological impact, she also suffered from abuse. But this could not continue forever. In 2020, Morgan decided it was time to put an end to it and filed for divorce. This decision immediately felt like a breath of fresh air. In December 2020, the marriage was officially dissolved. Morgan decided to move on, but she could not completely rid herself of her ex-husband since they had children together. When the decision to divorce was made, they did not go to court to divide custody. Instead, they agreed on everything verbally and remained on good terms in order to spare the younger generation from further hurt. The former spouses communicated closely and even took a joint trip to Florida to visit Morgan's sister before Christmas. Morgan and Rodney insisted that although the marital relationship was over, they continued to get along well for the sake of the children. Suddenly, on New Year's Eve, Morgan was attacked. Early in the morning of January 1st, 2021, Rodney arrived at his ex-wife's house. He knocked on the door, but no one answered. So, he walked around the house, thinking she was still asleep, calling her name. Suddenly, he found her on the back porch. She was lying partially naked on the deck with her hands tied behind her back and a pillowcase over her head. She was obviously badly hurt. Rodney provided first aid and asked her what had happened. He then called 911. Upon arrival, law enforcement officers recorded that Morgan had been subjected to cruel treatment, abuse, and beating. She was very scared and had difficulty explaining what had happened. Morgan stated that a stranger in a black mask had broken into her home that night, attacked her, hit her in the face, strangled her several times until she lost consciousness, and abused her. He threatened to kill her and even mentioned her ex-husband and relatives who no longer lived with her. The police began to investigate what had happened. In the presence of her relatives, who were already there, they recorded Morgan's story. She had intended to spend this New Year's Eve with her best friend. She waited until the new year, drank a glass of champagne, and realized she was too tired from the shocks of the previous month, so she decided to go home and go to bed early. Her friends had argued a little about this, but Morgan insisted that she wanted to rest and regain her strength. At that time, her 8-year-old children were visiting her parents, giving Morgan the opportunity to enjoy her first good night's sleep in several weeks. Morgan returned home, turned on the security system, and went to bed. She woke up during the night, feeling that someone was in the room. Morgan noticed a dark figure in the doorway. At first, she thought she was imagining things. When she looked closely, she realized this was not a dream. The man was dressed in black and wore a mask that looked like Batman's. The tall figure appeared very menacing, standing with his fists clenched as if preparing to attack. A gun appeared in Hai's hand. He pounced on the defenseless woman, hit her with the weapon, and then punched her in the face several times. After that, he turned her over onto her stomach and tied her hands behind her back with makeshift restraints made from plastic zip ties. She begged him to let her go, but the man ignored her pleas, only throwing out a few phrases about how she would regret what she had done. Morgan had the feeling that the stranger was deliberately straining his voice, as if trying to imitate Batman's tone and image. The most horrific aspect for her was the beatings and strangulation. She lost consciousness several times, and each time she regained it, the violence resumed. Morgan was convinced she would not survive the night. The criminal tortured her, bringing her to the brink of death and then allowing her to breathe. This became the worst memory of Morgan's life. She even said she had an out-of-body experience because of the attack, as if she had left her body and was witnessing her own death. She abstracted herself from the events, thinking about her children and what would happen to them. She remembered that she had not even had time to write a will. Meanwhile, the beatings continued. The attacker abused Morgan while continuing to hit her in the face and head. When Morgan later recounted this to law enforcement officers, she expressed disbelief that anyone could want to do such a thing to her. However, She was sure that the voice changes and the dark clothing covering every part of the attacker's body were meant to prevent her from recognizing him, suggesting that he must have been familiar with her. Experienced detectives agreed with this assessment. It is worth noting that the criminal threatened not only Morgan but also her husband. Despite being officially divorced at this time, during another instance of strangulation, the attacker said she would miss her husband. At that moment, Morgan suspected that Rodney himself could be behind the attack. Once this thought crossed her mind, she attempted to play his usual psychological game. Instead of addressing her attacker directly, she began to manipulate his feelings, begging him not to hurt Rodney because she loved Rodney very much. As soon as she said this, the assault immediately stopped. The criminal ceased beating her, left her on the bed, and began walking around the room looking for valuables, likely to steal. When this change occurred, Morgan realized that she had managed to save her life. The criminal had completely altered his behavior and began to act not like a murderer but as a robber. He took the first thing he could find from her locker and then asked for her phone number and password. As it turned out, he was not interested in bank cards but in the security system. There were several video cameras installed in the house that recorded the attack. After rummaging through her mobile phone, he carried she out onto the back porch and left her there, telling her that she should not move until she heard 2 car horns, otherwise, he would return and shoot her. He put a pillowcase over her head so she couldn't see anything. Morgan lay in this state for more than half an hour. She didn't hear any beeps, but she decided it was better not to take any chances and continued to lie still. It seemed to her that the criminal might be hiding nearby and watching her. It is worth noting that Morgan lived in a remote area of the city, where there were few houses nearby, so she could not even call for help. When about 40 minutes had passed in this state, Morgan heard extraneous noises and footsteps. She thought that the criminal might have changed his mind and was now returning to kill her. When the steps got closer and stopped, she heard the familiar voice of her relatives. Rodney had found his ex-wife there, bound in plastic zip ties with a pillowcase over her head. It was about 2 a.m. The very appearance of her ex-husband in Morgan's house at that time seemed strange. The children were visiting their grandparents, and they had not arranged to meet. Despite the strangeness of the situation, Morgan kept herself in check. She pretended to be hysterical, did not chase her ex away, and did not accuse him of the attack. On the contrary, Morgan began to act more cunningly. She tried to persuade Rodney to stay with her, call for help, and not go anywhere. In fact, her goal was to keep the alleged criminal there until the police arrived. When the emergency services were called, several police officers went to Morgan's house. At this time, Rodney was sitting outside in his car. This seemed odd, since he was the one who found his wife tied up and beaten. It would have been logical for him to be next to her, waiting for help. Instead, he was acting cautiously and even somewhat hostile. The law enforcement officers immediately began to ask themselves the same questions that had appeared in Morgan's head. What was her ex-husband doing in the house at 2 a.m. on New Year's Eve, just 40 minutes after the attack? Rodney justified his behavior by claiming romantic feelings and mentioning a strange young man. He said he was celebrating New Year's alone and thinking about his ex-wife. When a stranger stopped in front of the window and wrote the name Morgan on the frozen glass, it seemed alarming, so he decided to call her. After several unsuccessful attempts, he decided to go to the house himself because he felt that something was wrong. Rodney lived 15 minutes away from his ex-wife, so he arrived at her house relatively quickly, and for good reason. She really needed help. Detectives soon began to assess the situation. Morgan was so beaten that one of her eyes was swollen and almost completely shut. It was obvious that she had been the victim of a brutal attack by someone who was emotionally upset or angry at her, rather than by a random stranger or a burglar. Morgan's father and brother soon arrived at the scene. It was decided to speak to everyone present separately. Once Morgan was pulled aside, out of earshot from the rest of the family and her ex-husband, she made a significant confession. She claimed that it was Rodney who had not attacked her and was now posing as her savior to divert suspicion away from himself. The victim described the sequence of events in detail, including the moment when she began to profess her love for her ex, after which the beating abruptly stopped. She insisted that she recognized her ex-husband's touch, for example, when he lifted her from the bed to carry her to the porch. Morgan admitted that all this time she had deliberately kept Rodney nearby by asking him to stay with her. Morgan was afraid that if she directly accused her ex, he could kill her to cover his tracks. From a psychological perspective, this seemed plausible, as the most dangerous period for a woman who has been in a manipulative relationship for a long time is often the breakup. Morgan stated that for a week after the divorce, Rodney continued obsessively trying to maintain contact, seeking her pity. He even claimed that he had cancer, showing her a doctor's report. Considering that his brother had died of leukemia and his father was battling cancer during that period, this strategy evoked sympathy. Naturally, this sympathy did not lead to anything good. He was simply trying to get closer again because of his feelings. Morgan allowed him to spend the night at her house. A couple of days later, Rodney began persistently pushing to restore their relationship through pity and manipulation. By December 31st, she had realized this and finally broke off contact with him, cutting off her support. Rodney returned to his apartment, but less than a day later, she was brutally attacked. Throughout that day, Rodney tried to persuade her to rekindle their relationship, even stating that he had found a new high-paying job for her sake. He slipped a check for $56,000 under her door on New Year's Eve. Curiously, the man who attacked Morgan stole that check. None of this seemed like a coincidence. When Morgan laid out the facts to the police, her greatest fear was that the detectives would believe her manipulative ex-husband instead of her. This had happened multiple times before, even with people close to her. It was a huge relief when one of the detectives remarked that her story sounded quite convincing and that Rodney should be scrutinized closely. The detectives decided to catch the criminal in a lie, and to do this, they needed to verify each of his statements. They started with the calls he claimed to have made to his wife before he arrived. Morgan denied receiving any calls when the bastards took her cell phone. When investigators checked Rodney's phone, not only were there no outgoing calls on it, but there were numerous undressed photos of his ex-wife, taken as if she were unaware. Judging by the dates, the photos had been taken systematically over the week while Rodney was staying at her house after announcing that he had cancer. It appeared he had been filming her secretly. Additionally, Rodney had numerous photos of her phone, which contained conversations with other men. All this looked like stalking and confirmed the words of Morgan. When Morgan was asked about the photos, she stated that she had no idea about them and had not given permission for them to be taken. This alone was reason enough to bring charges, as it was considered a serious invasion of privacy. Rodney was detained and told outright that he was the assailant. He acted as if this was absurd. After checking Morgan's mobile phone, the police discovered that the criminal had deleted all the footage from the CCTV cameras in her home. However, this also indirectly confirmed the guilt of Rodney, since a random robber could hardly know about the security system of a random victim or how to use it. If the criminal was aware of the cameras, he would likely have chosen a less protected target. It was curious that the intruder knew how to enter the house without triggering the alarm. There were special sensors on all the doors and windows of Morgan's home. They were checked, and no signs of a break-in were found. The entire system remained operational, with the exception of one single window leading to the basement. As it turned out, the intruder had entered through this window. The switch was moved so that it did not work. Presumably, Rodney moved it on purpose while living there after the divorce, as he was planning an attack. The day after the arrest, the police received a search warrant for the suspect's home. When checking for sources of information, they found even more circumstantial evidence. Rodney's browser history was full of disturbing queries, such as, how much do you have to strangle a person to make them lose consciousness but not die, and how to change your voice. He had read an entire book about various psychological techniques for influencing women, titled, 7 Ways to Be a Hero to Your Wife. The doctor's note that confirmed Rodney's cancer diagnosis turned out to be fake. He had created a fake email account specifically to send himself a report from a fictitious doctor. During interrogation, Rodney found excuses for every suspicious fact that the police uncovered. After the first interrogation, the detectives decided that they did not have enough evidence against the main suspect. Rodney was released, and the investigation continued. The big problem for him was the plastic zip ties found in the apartment. Rodney had modified and cut them in a special way to make improvised handcuffs that could be quickly put on and secured to the hands. A whole package of such items was found in his apartment, as well as several sets that had been modified in the same way as those taken from Morgan's hands. When asked about the zip ties, Rodney claimed he had never owned any, as if he had never bought them. Perhaps someone had planted them on him to frame him. Even though they were found in his apartment, the police needed to confirm that Rodney was their owner. They then began checking local hardware stores. That same day, detectives found a video recording of the main suspect buying the zip ties. After that, Rodney didn't even know what to say. The most terrifying finding was the note. A farewell letter was discovered in the relative's apartment, indicating that he had planned to kill Morgan and then himself, leaving the children orphaned. Morgan miraculously managed to save herself by using a psychological trick that stopped the criminal and made him change his mind. He probably thought that not all was lost and that he could get back together with his ex-wife. The hope of a reunion actually saved her life. Among the most valuable pieces of evidence was a video of the facade of the apartment building where Rodney lived. No one came to the windows, and no one wrote Morgan's name with their finger. The criminal himself returned scene after the attack, having been inside for about 4 minutes. Presumably, during this time, he changed his clothes and disposed of the evidence. When leaving the apartment, before driving back to his house, he carried a black bag with him, which he discarded. Unfortunately, it was not found, but investigators believed that Rodney had thus disposed of material evidence. Just 1 day later, Rodney was arrested again. This time, in addition to the charges of violating privacy, they added a whole list of charges that included trespassing, damaging someone else's property, possession of a firearm, robbery with a weapon, aggravated assault, kidnapping, and abuse. He was held without bail. During this period, Morgan's children continued to live with her parents. When she took her twins, there was a difficult conversation in which she tried to explain that their father would no longer be around. For months, Morgan woke up from nightmares, dreaming of an attack, a mask, and a threatening voice. Sometimes, she couldn't even muster the strength to send her children to school because she was afraid to be alone in the house. The prosecutor's office had enough evidence against Rodney to put him behind bars. To avoid subjecting Morgan to the hardships of a trial, a plea deal was offered, and they both agreed to it. 8 months after the attack, on August 4, 2021, Rodney Metzer pleaded guilty to 14 counts related to the assault on his ex-wife. He was sentenced to a total of 70 years in prison, but with the possibility of parole after 25 years, it is understood that the remainder of the sentence will be served on probation. In fact, he will never leave the authorities' sight again for the rest of his life. Interestingly, he forbids even his own mother from visiting him in prison. Rodney is expected to be released in 2046. Morgan underwent therapy and has actually recovered from the trauma she experienced. Morgan said she is dedicated to helping women in similar situations as she was. She is also focused on raising her children. The case of Lori Vallow. Chad Daybell was born on August 11, 1968, in Provo, Utah, a small town 18 miles south of Salt Lake City. He grew up in a humble family and was a quiet, shy child. In school, Chad was an average student with no standout talents or athletic skills, and he often felt self-conscious about his weight. After graduating from high school, Chad enrolled at Brigham Young University, BYU, in Utah, overcoming several challenges to do so. He a bachelor's degree in journalism in 1992. While in college, he married a woman named Tammy. The couple quickly had 5 children, 3 sons, Seth, Mark, and G, and 2 daughters, Emma and Leah. After completing his education, Chad worked as an editor for a local newspaper. To support his family through financial difficulties, he also took on jobs as a night watchman at a church and as a gravedigger at a nearby cemetery. Since Tammy focused on homemaking and raising their children, the family struggled to make ends meet. Chad then decided to use his journalism education to write a religious-themed book. He published his first work in 1999, which was a collection of religious stories and fantasy elements. To his surprise, the book became quite popular and earned him a big income. As a result, Chad quit his jobs at the cemetery and the newspaper to pursue writing full-time. About a year and a half later, he released another book titled 1 Foot in the Grave. This book was a science work in which he shared his experiences as a gravedigger and explored themes of death, the afterlife, and soul reincarnation. In 2004, Chad established his own publishing company, Spring Creek, to self-publish his writings. His works focused on views about the approaching end of the world and Judgment Day. Over time, some people noted that Chad's religious beliefs seemed to grow more intense. He published numerous fiction and popular science books that included religious themes. Additionally, he began hosting podcasts and creating audio and video sermons to help people prepare for the second coming of Christ. Chad referred to himself as an apocalyptic writer and claimed to have visions of the future, hear voices from the deceased, and receive unique prophecies. Lori Vallow was born on June 26, 1973, in Loma Linda, California. Growing up in a large family, she had 2 older brothers and 3 sisters. Her parents, Denise and Barry Cox, worked hard to support their children. From a young age, Lori was especially close to her older brother Alex, who was protective of her. During her school years, Lori was recognized as a true beauty and had many admirers. She was a charismatic blonde with a slender figure and an engaging smile, enjoying the spotlight and embodying a spirited, adventurous personality. In the spring of 1992, 18-year-old Lori married Nelson Yanes, with whom she had started dating during her senior year. However, they soon realized they had rushed into marriage and were unprepared for family life, resulting in their divorce less than a year later. They did not have any children together. In the fall of 1995, Lori remarried, this time to William Leah. A year later, they welcomed a son named Colby, but their marriage ended in 1998, just 2 years after his birth. In early 2001, Lori married Joseph Anthony Ryan, who adopted her son from her previous marriage, Colby. A year later, they had a daughter named Tylee, but their marriage ended in 2005. After the divorce, an incident occurred when Joseph came to visit the children. Lori's brother, Alex, attacked him, stating in court that he was protecting his sister's honor because Joseph had insulted her. Consequently, Alex was fined and received a short prison sentence. Lori married Charles shortly after divorcing her third husband, Joseph. They got married in February 2006, and Charles is 17 years older than Lori. Despite the age difference, it did not affect their relationship. Charles had been married before and had 2 teenage sons, Zachary and Nicholas, from those relationships. Lori and Charles lived in Nevada with Lori's children from her previous marriages, while Charles's sons would visit on holidays and weekends. Charles owned a small business that provided a stable income for his family. Lori, who had not pursued further education, did not work, but Charles never criticized her for it. In 2014, the couple officially adopted a young boy named Joshua Jackson, also known as JJ Vallow, who was Charles's grandnephew. JJ had autism and needed expensive therapy, which his relatives could afford. Towards the end of 2014, the family Charles decided to move to the Hawaiian Islands, specifically to Kauai. At that time, Zachary, Nicholas, and Colby were already adults living on their own, so the Charles family moved as a group of 4, Lori, Charles, Tylee, and JJ. The family Charles moved to a well-known tourist destination and decided to open a beach bar that focused on fresh juices, smoothies, refreshing drinks, and non-alcoholic cocktails. Despite their hard work and Charles's background in business, but the bar quickly failed due to strong competition. During this period, Lori an interest in religious literature, particularly a book series called Standing in Holy Places by Chad Daybell. She became so fascinated by the writer's Chad ideas that she became almost obsessed, buying all his books and reading them every day. In 2016, the family Charles had to leave Hawaii and move back to the mainland, settling in Arizona. While Charles worked diligently to support the family, his wife, Lori, became more engrossed in her religious beliefs, becoming disconnected from reality. In October 2018, Lori and her close friend Melanie went to an event titled Preparing People for the Second Coming of Christ, which was hosted by Chad in a nearby town. Excited to meet Chad, whom she admired greatly, Lori sat in the front row, completely focused on him, and Chad also noticed her attractive appearance. After the event, the writer Chad and religious speaker decided to personally exchange with his readers, while Lori, as expected, remained behind. She listened intently and asked if she could touch his hand. After she did, Chad looked into her eyes and revealed that they had been husband and wife in 7 previous lives. Lori and Chad exchanged contact information and began talking every day. A few weeks later, while Charles, Lori's husband, was away in Nevada for work, she invited Chad to host a gathering at her home. On that day, around 12 people gathered at the Lori house to discuss God, Judgment Day, and the Second Coming. Lori and Chad decided to work together to prepare people for the impending judgment. They started hosting podcasts about this event, delivering sermons, and writing articles. As time went on, Lori became more disconnected from reality in her family, but Charles did not notice this change right away. He believed it was just a temporary obsession that would eventually fade. By the time he recognized the severity of the situation, it was too late. Lori began to speak about dark spirits and zombies, claiming to her family and friends that she had been chosen by God for a special mission. This mission included the task of defeating the spirits of darkness, demons, and all evil. Charles's efforts to help his wife return to reality were unsuccessful, and she increasingly viewed him as a dark force that needed to be eliminated. By the end of 2018, Charles and Lori's marriage was nearing its end. In February 2019, while Charles was away on a week-long business trip, Lori replaced all the locks in their home. When he returned, Charles found himself locked out, noticed that both his car and the family truck were gone, and realized that $35,000 had been withdrawn from his bank account. Charles shouted for his wife and attempted to enter their home. In a chaotic manner, Lori rushed outside, shouting threats and insults. She yelled that his true self was gone and that a demon had taken over his body. Without hesitation, Charles went to the police station to report Lori for stealing from him and blocking his access to their home and children. He was worried that Lori had threatened to harm him, so he requested a protective order to keep Lori away from him. That evening, Charles's statements were documented as part of standard procedure. He mentioned his wife's intense religious beliefs, her expectation of an imminent apocalypse, and the tendency to categorize people into 2 groups, either light or demonic beings. Although the officers mocked him while asking questions, they still issued a protective order. The following day, Charles filed for divorce and changed the beneficiary of his $1 million life insurance policy from Lori to his mother and sister. Charles's lawyer explained that he was worried about the well-being of JJ, who needed special care. He believed that his mother and sister would responsibly manage the insurance money and care for JJ if anything happened to him. A few months later, Charles made the critical error of rescind the restraining order against Lori. Charles wanted to reconcile with Lori and save their marriage. So he started visiting her home. He missed the children and hoped for the family to come back together. On July 11th, 2019, when he arrived to see his children, he was shot twice in the chest and died. Lori's brother, Alex, called emergency services to report the shooting and admitted to pulling the trigger. He claimed he acted in self-defense, stating that Charles attacked him first with a baseball bat. In response, he pulled out a pistol and fired 2 shots at Charles. The incident was witnessed by the homeowner and the children, and their accounts of what happened were mostly similar. The court determined that the incident was an accidental killing that occurred in self-defense. Although Charles had the potential to cause serious harm with a bat due to his history as a former baseball player, Alex's head injury was minor. On the same day Charles's body was taken to the morgue, Lori hosted a party at their home, complete with music, many guests, and a disco by the pool, right where her husband had been shot and where blood was still visible. She did not organize a funeral or inform anyone about what happened. A week after Charles died, his son, mother, sister, and other family members discovered the incident when they learned that his body had not yet been claimed at the morgue. After Charles's death, a series of mysterious disappearances and deaths occurred. Lori sold their home in Arizona and moved with her children to Rexburg, Idaho, near Chad and Tammy, who lived in the area. Lori's brother, Alex, also moved in with them to the same housing complex. Lori's 16-year-old daughter, Tylee, did not attend school and was rarely seen outside. This led many neighbors to be unaware of Tylee's existence. At the same time, Lori described her daughter as a dark entity during a phone call with a friend. On September 8, 2019, Tylee, Lori, and Alex visited Yellowstone Park, where were joined by Chad. Although several photographs from this trip feature Tylee, she was never seen alive again after that day. On September 24th, Lori withdrew JJ's records from school, stating he would be homeschooled. Following this, JJ, 7-year-old boy, was also not seen again. Less than a month later, on October 19th, Chad's 49-year-old wife Tammy died unexpectedly. Chad claimed she had a cold and cough. She likely passed away from respiratory failure during her sleep, showing no signs of foul play. Her death was classified as natural. Interestingly, Chad refused to allow an autopsy to confirm the cause of death, a choice that raised no suspicions. After Tammy unexpectedly passed away, Chad received nearly $500,000 from her insurance policy. 2 weeks later, Chad and Lori went to Hawaii and got married in a ceremony by the beach. This surprised Chad's children, people who are still grieving the loss of their mothers and found it hard to understand their father's decision. When they returned to Arizona, Chad and Lori lived together and misled others by stating that Lori's children were staying with relatives or claiming she had no children at all. They also rented a small storage unit nearby and moved all the children's belongings there, as if they had never existed in their home. On December 12, 2019, Alex passed away unexpectedly at home. Although it seemed he died from a heart attack, so his death was classified as natural. As time went on, many people began to ask Lori about her children's whereabouts. While she was able to deceive neighbors and friends, it was more challenging to maintain her lies in front of family members. Colby, Lori's eldest son, had limited contact with his mother after he moved away. He made a real effort to contact his younger sister, Tylee. At first, Lori answered the calls using her daughter's phone, pretending to be Tylee. However, Colby quickly realized that something was wrong. Meanwhile, Charles's family wanted to see JJ. They requested to take him for holidays or weekends, or just wanted to chat with him on the phone, but Lori always refused or came up with strange excuses. Eventually, JJ's grandmother reported him missing to the police. Shortly after, Colby also went to the police to help find his younger sister, Tylee. When police officers visited Lori's home and requested to speak with her children, she falsely claimed they were with relatives. This turned out to be untrue, so the police returned to her house. They gave Lori a week to bring the children to the station, but instead, she and Chad escaped to Hawaii. On February 20th, 2020, Lori was arrested on Kauai and brought back to Arizona. A search of her and Chad's home was conducted, but there were no signs of the children or evidence that they had ever been there. Chad, her husband, who had been defending her by claiming she had no children, soon became a suspect himself. On June 9th, police found human remains buried in their backyard. Forensic analysis confirmed that the remains belonged to Tylee and her younger brother, JJ. Chad was quickly arrested for hiding evidence and being an accomplice. Authorities then chose to exhume the bodies of Tammy and Alex to determine how they died. In both cases, they discovered traces of chemicals that could cause heart failure, indicating that these individuals did not die of natural causes. The trial of Lori and Chad began in January 2021. They were charged with conspiring to commit serious crimes, committing fraud through grand theft, and engaging in insurance fraud. Additionally, the circumstances surrounding Charles's death were changed from self-defense to premeditated murder. During the trial, witnesses testified that Lori described her children as dark entities and claimed she could save their souls. There were concerns that the deaths of 16 years old, Tylee, and 7 years old, JJ, may have involved ritualistic practices. Notably, Tylee's body was found partially burned, and weeks before that, Chad sent Lori a people review email in which he rated Tyle as a level 2 dark soul. Due to the serious charges against Lori and Chad, there was a possibility of capital punishment. However, in May 2021, Lori's defense team successfully argued that she was incompetent, which paused the trial. Meanwhile, all 5 of Chad's adult children maintained their father's innocence, stating that he was framed by Lori and Alex. In 2022, after receiving treatment in a psychiatric facility, Lori was found competent to stand trial and face her charges. In March 2023, the judge decided that Lori Vallow would not receive the death penalty, a ruling that the prosecution is currently trying to appeal. Later, in July 2023, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Meanwhile, on May 30th, 2023, Chad Daybell was convicted of first-degree murder of his first wife, Tammy, and Lori's 2 children, Joshua, JJ, Vallow, and Tylee, as well as conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud. Chad Daybell then was sentenced to death on June 1st, 2024.